Good morning, everybody. If you could find your seats, we're going to get going. Before we get started with the meeting, we're going to have Leah walk us through some of our guidelines and meeting etiquette for today. Leah?
Please note the following guidelines for our meeting. Upon joining the virtual meeting, your microphone will be muted automatically. In case of any technical issues during the meeting, notify us in the chat and we will help you. Please note that the chat will only be monitored for technical assistance. Public comments are welcome and will be rotated between in-person and virtual attendees. To ask a question, make a comment, please use your device's raise hand feature. If on the phone, dial *9 on Zoom, and if using a computer, click the hand reaction icon at the bottom of your screen. During the comment period, the host will enable you to unmute yourself. You can then unmute yourself by pressing the mute button on your device or dialing *6 on your phone. Keep discussions focused on the agenda items and questions at hand. Offensive, disrespectful, or derogatory language, including profanity, personal attacks, or threats or insults towards individuals, governments, or organizations is strictly prohibited. Assume positive intentions from those speaking and listen respectfully. To ensure a balanced discussion, limit your comments to 2 minutes with one clarifying follow-up question. Please provide constructive feedback regarding the fisheries in which you participate. Remember that the most compelling comments are those that pertain to the topics under discussion. WDFW staff may close public comment to stay on schedule with the agenda or to provide others who still need to comment with an opportunity to speak. The hybrid meetings will be recorded and posted online. And if you have further questions or comments, please submit them in written format on our public comment webpage.
Well, again, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Baltzell. I'm the statewide salmon and steelhead manager for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'd like to welcome you to our second in our series of public meetings for this year's preseason planning process for salmon. Today, we're going to go through a little bit of the process. We're going to do a quick overview of the forecast that we presented at our meeting on March 1st. We're going to talk to you about some of the things that happened last week at our Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting that happened in Fresno and some of the options that came out of that meeting. We're going to have our modeling staff walk through some preliminary modeling results, and then we'll go through our remaining meeting schedule for the rest of the preseason process. So for those of folks who are new, North of Falcon is an annual cooperative process that the state goes through with a various amount of different entities to set salmon seasons in Washington waters. The name North of Falcon refers to Cape Falcon off of Oregon's coast, which marks the southern border of Washington's management of salmon stocks. Our process is one component in a larger season setting process coastwide that involves state, tribal governments, federal regulators, and Canada. This is a graphic of our timeline, and it's up on our website for you to review at any time. We're kind of right there in the middle where we have public meetings off to the side. We're going to be having a series of public meetings statewide over the next couple weeks to gather public input, share modeling results, and take input on preferred salmon seasons for this year. We're going to end up this process in April and May at the Pacific Fisheries Management Council meeting in Seattle in early April. And then during the May-June period, we'll be taking feedback on our rules package and getting that finished up in the month of June. So also, for those who are familiar, you'll know that the season setting process for salmon is pretty complex. There's lots of things that we need to consider about putting salmon seasons on the water, both in the marine areas and the freshwater areas of Washington. Some of the things that we consider are Endangered Species Act constraints, our commission policy on North of Falcon, Pacific Salmon Treaty obligations, tribal co-management, and then also monitoring and evaluation of our fisheries on a statewide basis. I'm going to go through just a quick recap of the forecast that we went through in early March. For Puget Sound Chinook, you'll see that overall we're down a little bit from last year. Natural stocks are down, but hatchery stocks are up, at least on the recent 10-year average. Coastal Chinook, you'll notice that natural stocks are up 2%. Hatchery stocks are down 7% from the recent 10-year average, and both are slightly down from last year. Columbia River Chinook, the forecasts for spring and summer Chinook are less than 23, but similar to actual returns from last year. The lower river hatchery and upriver bright stocks are similar relative to last year's forecast. Bonneville Pool Hatchery, or BPH, forecast is slightly less than last year's forecast. For Puget Sound coho, overall, the total coho forecasted to come back to Puget Sound is down about 5% from last year's forecast. The natural stocks and the hatchery stocks are both up when looking at a 10-year average. For coastal coho, the natural stocks are up and the hatchery stocks are up from the 10-year average, but both of those are down about 20% from last year's forecast. And for Columbia River coho, the forecast methodology was changed this year, and therefore can't really be compared to the previous forecast, but it is down relative to last year's forecast. For Puget Sound chum, we've been in a recent year downturn on productivity for Puget Sound chum. This year, the natural stocks and hatchery stocks are both down from the 10-year average, and there's about 800,000 chum forecasted to return to Puget Sound. Coastal chum, both Willapa and Grays Harbor, are up from the 10-year average. And finally, looking at sockeye stocks statewide, the Baker Lake forecast is up 57% from the 10-year average. Lake Washington sockeye continue to struggle. That forecast is down significantly from the 10-year average. And Columbia River sockeye is a bright spot, with the Wenatchee forecast and the Okanagan forecast both up from last year's forecast. And with that, I believe I'm going to hand it to Kyle Addix, who's our Intergovernmental Salmon Manager. He's going to run us through events that happened last week in Fresno.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. If it seems like it was just 12 days ago we had a meeting in this room, it seems like way longer if you spent 7 days in Fresno, California. But we were down in Fresno as the part of the Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting, setting the initial alternatives for ocean fisheries off the Washington coast, as well as the Oregon and California coast. This slide's just a summary of some of the driver exploitation rates for planning our ocean fisheries. Lower Columbia tules are one of the key Chinook stocks in the ocean. This year, we can have an exploitation rate of up to 41%. That's 3% higher than what was allowed last year. Lower Columbia River natural coho, a 23% ceiling. We have to be mindful of all of our coastal coho stocks as we plan ocean fisheries. I'll highlight the one we're really focused on this year, Quileute, in another slide. We also have to watch the interior Fraser River coho and returning to Canada, where we have a 10% southern U.S. exploitation rate ceiling. So next slide, please. Our ocean alternatives for Chinook this year are very similar to last year. We have a high alternative of 85,000, a middle alternative of 78,000, and a low alternative of 72,000. Last year's actual quota was 78,000, so the ocean range is centered right on where the actual quota was last year. For coho, you heard at the forecast meeting that the abundance of Oregon production index area hatchery coho was way down from last year. So coho quotas in the ocean are less than half of what they were last year. Last year, the actual quota was 190,000. This year, our range is a high option of 105,000, middle option of 95,000, low option of 80,000. There was one handout at the table that's the details of the season proposals that correspond to these quota levels. But these are the quotas that are being evaluated for ocean fisheries this year. So the results of our preliminary modeling, as I mentioned, tules returning to the Columbia or a key Chinook driver stock, a ceiling of 41% this year. Our high ocean option is 40.6%, and that includes a higher harvest rate in the Columbia River than was allowable last year. Lower Columbia natural coho, our management criteria is a 23% total exploitation rate. The ocean fisheries and the high option are at 17.1%. That includes the high option for Washington, the high option for Oregon, and that 17.1% is higher than what we're targeting for ocean fisheries, which is about 2/3 of that 23% total. So we want to see something closer to 15% for our ocean fisheries. And there's a lot of interplay there with Washington and Oregon fisheries. I mentioned Quileute River coho as being one of our key stocks this year. We have an allowable exploitation rate of 39% for all fisheries, and our modeling at the high option out of PFMC was 42.6%. There's work that has to go on with shaping freshwater fisheries to meet that 39% as well, though. And now I am passing it off to Derek Dapp. Derek's also spent a week in Fresno looking hard at numbers and modeling things for us, but he's going to walk us through our Puget Sound objectives.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everybody. I'm Derek Dapp. I work within WDFW in the modeling team. So on screen now, we see our Chinook management objectives for Puget Sound. Before going into management objectives, you might notice that there's a few different metrics in the column to the right. When we're looking at exploitation rates represent the percentage of an adult population taken either in a fishery or within a grouping of fisheries. So when you see total exploitation rate, that represents the percentage of the population of that stock taken in all fisheries from Alaska down to California. When you see SUS, that stands for a Southern U.S. exploitation rate, and that represents all the impact of all fisheries south of Canada. And lastly, when you see PTSUS, that stands for pre-terminal Southern U.S., and that represents all fisheries south of Canada, minus the areas of return, the rivers of return for these stocks. So as we're looking at the Chinook management objectives in Puget Sound, just mentioning some of the highlights here, Stillaguamish River has been one of our main constraining stocks in the past several years. We're still at the same management objectives in the coming year, 9% unmarked Southern U.S. and 14% marked Southern U.S. You might notice that there's two stocks that are labeled as to be determined. So starting with Snohomish River. Snohomish River is coming out below its lower bound threshold in terms of abundance for the naturals. That's particularly driven by the Snoqualmie portion of the population. And so we'll have to discuss what an appropriate management objective is with our co-managers. Likewise, for Nooksack Springs, we're noticing that there's an extremely poor abundance, particularly of the wild returning North Fork fish this year. There's forecast to be in our model runs right now about 29 fish in escapement for the North Fork Nooksack Springs. And because of that, we're expecting that we'll have to have some discussions with our co-managers on what the appropriate level of exploitation is there. Moving into the current modeling, Kyle had mentioned that for Chinook, we're looking at a high ocean option of 85,000. And you can see on the right here, this is our modeling outputs from that high ocean option. Looking across the board, there are a few stocks to highlight here. Nooksack Springs, Stillaguamish, Snohomish. We're all going to be looking at what those objectives are versus what the model run outputs are in the coming runs. The other one that I would mention is Skagit Summer Falls, which is falling below its low abundance threshold and is currently not meeting its management objectives in the high ocean option run. So moving on to coho, things are pretty similar to last year. One thing that I would mention is Skagit, if folks remember last year, was in a lower abundance tier. So there was a 35% total exploitation rate ceiling for Skagit. We've now jumped up in abundance tier. We'll see in the next slide, but Snohomish is really going to be the most limiting stock in coho fisheries this year. Although we're also going to be paying attention to interior Fraser, which is coming out below its management objectives in all the ocean option runs, but in the high ocean option run, it's at 9.8% Southern U.S., I believe. And there you go. So in the high ocean option run, 9.8 Southern U.S. for the Thompson stock. So that's something to pay attention to. But really the stock that's coming out above its management objectives in these first ocean option runs is Snohomish. So now I think I might pass the mic to Mark.
Thanks, Derek. Quickly, just want to run through kind of our remaining meeting schedule, and then we'll get to questions and comments on this package. Just a reminder to folks following this immediate meeting, we'll be taking a break and doing 2 breakout meetings. One is for Puget Sound recreational fishing, which will stay in this auditorium. The second will be Puget Sound Commercial, which will be in the Natural Resources Building across the way in room 172. If folks are here and have want to talk about coastal freshwater fisheries, we will have staff available and can find a spot for you to get together if you had specific questions about coastal freshwater fisheries. Following today's meeting, we're actually going to have a meeting with our co-managers tomorrow and 2 days of meetings to end this week. As I stated, over the next couple of weeks, we'll be having a number of public meetings throughout the state. Next Tuesday evening will be a Zoom meeting for Puget Sound recreational and coastal freshwater. Followed that on Thursday will be Columbia River Fisheries North of Falcon meeting. That'll be a hybrid meeting both in Ridgefield and online. On Thursday evening, we'll have a second Puget Sound recreational fisheries focused on Puget Sound freshwater and marine fisheries. On Monday, March 25th, there'll be a PFMC public hearing on ocean salmon alternatives in Westport. On March 27th, we'll be back again for a public meeting in Linwood, Washington at the Linwood Embassy Suites for our North of Falcon 2 meeting. We'll have additional modeling results to share and take additional feedback on fisheries proposals for this year at that meeting. Also on Wednesday, March 27th, there'll be a Northeast and McNary Upper Columbia Snake River meeting with a to be determined location, but it will be in Clarkston, Washington. Stay tuned to the website for updates on that. On the 28th, we'll have a Willapa Grays Harbor fisheries discussion. That'll be a Zoom meeting from 6 to 8. And as I said, the second Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting will be from April 6th to the 11th at the Westin in Seattle this year. Rounding out our meetings for this spring will be a final Willapa Grays Harbor proposed fishing package, and that'll be a Zoom meeting from 6 to 8 on the 16th. Up on the screen, there's a lot of different links to our website, different spots where you can find information about the preseason process, modeling results, full schedule, and other materials, forecast materials, and other things. So please feel free to visit that site. With that, we are now moving on to questions and comments. We will alternate between people in the room and folks online. And I might check first to see if Leah has anybody online with a question. Is there anybody here in the audience that has a question for us on what we presented?
All I wondered was what time you'd be starting that meeting up at Linwood.
I'm not sure we have a starting time for that meeting in Linwood, but I would, let's plan on 9 o'clock, Jack.
So on these ocean options, how can the public comment? Can we go online and register a comment? How's that all work?
Kyle, do you want to take that one?
Making sure this one's on. Shannon, the council has ways to comment. You can also go through WDFW's comment portal. Just make sure you're saying you're commenting on the ocean fisheries. If you comment on something else, it gets hard for us to channel them to the right places. But our online portal will take comments that I'll take back to the PFMC process.
Other comments on the presentation or questions?
Just a reminder for folks online, you can raise your hand with *6 or the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen.
Well, great. We appreciate everybody's time this morning. We're going to give ourselves about 10 or 15 minutes between now and allow people to get over to the other meeting. Like I said, for those wanting to talk about Puget Sound Recreational, we'll stay right here and we'll be back together in 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you again to everybody for being here. Welcome back, everybody. We are in the Puget Sound recreational discussion for today. Chad, can you go back 2 slides, please? So again, just want to touch briefly on our public meeting guidelines and etiquette. When you join our meeting today virtually, your microphone will be muted. In case of any technical issues during the meeting, notify us in the chat. Chad, can you close that, please? Thank you. Public comments are welcome and will be rotated between in-person and virtual attendees. To ask a question or make a comment, please use your raised hand feature. On the phone, dial *9 on Zoom. If using a computer, click the hand reactions icon at the bottom of your screen. During the comment period, the host will enable you to unmute yourself. You can then unmute yourself by pressing the mute button on your device or dialing *6 on your phone. We're trying to keep discussions focused on the agenda items and questions at hand. Offensive, disrespectful, derogatory language, including profanity, personal attacks, threats, or insults towards individuals, governments, or organizations are strictly prohibited. Please assume positive intentions from those speaking and listen respectfully. To ensure a balanced discussion, limit your comments to 2 minutes with 1 clarifying follow-up question. Provide constructive feedback regarding fisheries in which you participate. Remember, the most compelling comments are those that pertain to the topics under discussion. Staff may close public comment to stay on schedule with the agenda. This hybrid meeting will be recorded and posted online. And please visit our website under the North of Falcon Public Input if you have questions, comments, and submit your input there. So again, we're in the recreational discussion. The folks on this slide are really your recreational powerhouse for Puget Sound. Again, I'm the statewide salmon and steelhead manager, Mark Baltzell. Dr. Kirsten Simonson is not here today. We actually have given her a couple of days off during the process to be with a family event. Dr. Derek Dapp is here. He's the lead of our FRAM modeling team. Haley Rosenthal will be going through some of our presentation this morning. She's a support biologist in Puget Sound. Ty Garber is our main coho modeler. He's here today. And Sarah Richardson is our Mark Selective Fisheries biologist. So again, we're going to just do a quick overview of some of the stuff that we went over in the first part of the meeting. We're going to go through some recreational considerations for this year. Specifically, we're going to go through some marine areas 10 and 11 management considerations for this year. Derek's going to walk us through some of exploratory modeling that the modeling staff have done. And obviously, we're here to take public comment today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Haley.
Hello. Is this good? Way closer? Okay. So up here we have the Chinook management objectives for Puget Sound. We can actually go to the next slide since it also has even closer. We're going to go to the next slide to also show the Chinook model run with the current high ocean option, which is 85,000 Chinook. As Derek went over in the main presentation, Nooksack Spring, Skagit Summer Fall Chinook, Stillaguamish Chinook, and Snohomish River Chinook are our concerning stocks as we shape fisheries this year. I guess I'm still not hearable online. Okay, well, sorry everybody. Should I repeat my last slide? I can repeat that one more time. So on the screen now is the current Chinook modeling. Current Chinook modeling output with a high ocean option of 85,000 Chinook, as well as the Chinook management objectives, Nooksack Springs, Skagit Summer Falls, Stillaguamish Chinook, and Snohomish Chinook are our concerning stocks as we shape our fisheries this year. Our next slide is for coho management objectives in Puget Sound. And as Derek said, the only main difference from this year and last year is Skagit. It has improved from low to normal with an ER ceiling raising from 35% to 60%. The next table is showing the ocean options and how each ocean option, high,
mid and low reflects on the management units for Coho. Snohomish is bold as each ocean option is coming in above the Snohomish ER ceiling. Now going into recreational considerations for 2024. As previously mentioned, Nooksack Spring Chinook, Skagit Summer Fall Chinook, and Snohomish Chinook and Coho will be stocks to be aware of as we shape our fisheries. Stillaguamish Chinook conservation limits will continue to drive most recreational opportunity. And we do our best to provide fishing opportunity given available impacts as well as conservation constraints. We received a lot of feedback this year for marine areas 10 and 11, and we have some considerations to propose to all of you in a couple of slides. Some other considerations include the increase in effort over historical averages. Also this year, there's reduced forecasts of Puget Sound Chinook and Coho relative to last year, and other considerations include the environmental concerns with our current El Nino. Freshwater fishery considerations. Most rivers expected to have similar opportunities as last year. The continued poor stock performance on the Snohomish will most likely result in a similar season as last year. And then the rivers listed here may have some changes in gear or retention rules this year. Those include Cascade, Green, Minter, Nissel, Nisqually, Puyallup, Quilcene, and Samish rivers. And next week on March 19th and 21st, we will be further discussing these. Now to hand it back over to Mark to go over Marine Area 10 and 11 considerations.
So we've heard a lot of feedback since last summer regarding the management and actions we had to take in marine areas 10 and 11 in our recreational salmon fisheries last summer. We're looking to take feedback this year on some potential different approaches in the management of that fishery. Obviously, we're going to do what we can on the kind of development of modeling input side to do what we can to maximize those impacts within that marine area. But obviously, the outcomes from last year are nothing that anybody wanted, and we'd really like to try to work with folks to put in different management approaches that would help ensure that we're going to keep that area open during the peak of the Chinook return in that area. So I want to point folks online and out in the lobby. We have a specific proposal that the department developed for consideration this year as an approach on how we could better manage the season, specifically in marine areas 10 and 11. Another consideration that we've been thinking about is the month of June in Area 11. If that's still a desirable month for folks to fish in, we may have to manage it a little more closely, a lot like we do in Area 7, where we'll announce a short 3 or 4 day season, and then we'll provide additional opportunities depending on where we are on impacts. I think also last year, one of the things that caught us off guard is, we had met our impact thresholds before we got into August, and then we didn't have any non-retention impacts built into the month of August in case we had to switch to coho and pink. So that's another thing we're looking at this year, is to add additional non-retention impacts during that month of August. So if we do have to close for Chinook early, we're still able to stay open the rest of the month and into the fall for coho-directed fisheries. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Derek and the modeling team. The folks you see here are credible, dedicated individuals, have a lot of brain power on this team that work really hard. Derek and Yi, I might point out, and Ty have been working many long, multiple 10-hour days here in the last week or so to get us to where we are today. So thanks to them for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Derek to walk us through some stuff.
1 second to set up here. I'm just going to make sure that we have, this is big enough on the screen. Hopefully folks in the back of the room give a thumbs up if you can see it. So as in the past, we're going to walk through a Chinook modeling tool where we look at a number of management scenarios and see how those might affect some of the key stocks of concern this year. This file was just posted online this morning, and I think that Leah is going to be posting a link in chat if there's anybody from the public who wants to download this tool and be able to follow along with it. For those who haven't used this tool in the past, the way that it works is we're looking at our key stocks of concern in these rows right here between columns, or sorry, these columns between C and H. We have, going across the top, we have Stillaguamish, Snohomish, Nisqually, Skagit Summer Falls, Nooksack Springs, and then a total Puget Sound Sport marine catch. Looking at each of the objectives for this year, for Stillaguamish, typically we look at a 50-50 sharing ratio on the mortalities with the tribes. And right now, to meet a 9% unmarked SUS management objective, it looks like that sharing is going to be around 63 mortalities. It's relatively early in the modeling process, and so there's always a little bit of wiggle room on what that final number shakes out as. It will probably be somewhere between maybe 60 and 70 mortalities. So for these first model runs, what we typically do is for those Stillaguamish mortalities, we target a little bit above where we think we might need to be in the end, just in case as some of the modeling changes, if that opens up some flexibility. In terms of Snohomish, I do think that Snohomish is going to be one of the main constraining stocks this year. We still have to discuss what an appropriate management objective is with our co-managers, but for folks who remember last year when we were coming to the end of the modeling process, Snohomish really became one of our main constraining stocks. In this year, I expect it to be similar. I have Nisqually on the list here, although I don't think that Nisqually will be as big of a driver maybe as Snohomish, Nooksack, and Stillaguamish. Nisqually does particularly drive some of our fisheries in South Sound. If folks remember last year, we had changes to the in-river for Nisqually, and it also helped to shape some of our decisions on that we made about particularly marine areas 10 and 11 as we were going through the modeling process. Skagit Summer Falls is a stock that's coming out below its low abundance threshold, and in our current modeling runs is about 2% above the objective. And Nooksack Springs, I spoke to a little bit when we did our first presentation, but we're in a status there where we're discussing what an appropriate management objective is for that stock. So that's going to be a key one to pay attention to as we're going through this modeling exercise. As we go through each of the rows, as we're going through each of the rows, we can look at potential actions. And the way that we can signify taking each of these actions is if we put an X in these highlighted boxes. And as we update that, you can see how that would affect our current run. You can see the results of taking that action in this set of rows right here, the post-action exploitation rate. And you can see, for example, when we update the sublegal legal ratios for all fisheries, this will be one of the first steps in our modeling process. It will reduce Stillaguamish mortalities by about 1.4 in terms of the non-treaty mortalities. Relatively small effect on most of the other parameters that we're looking at in the modeling. I have these labeled as pre-run actions because these are ones that are imminent and not necessarily related to our sport fisheries. The Chinook non-retention is one that I guess could be. But I would recommend if you're going to use the modeling tool to just put an X in each of these boxes and consider this as a starting place. I will say right now, we're looking to do our first set of model runs with Puget Sound fisheries tonight. And as we do those, we're still actually missing a few inputs. So when I was doing this modeling exercise yesterday, there are a few down here in the notes that are not included in this modeling that I'm representing today, but should be included tomorrow. I built this set of runs off the high ocean options. One thing that you could consider is if you wanted to look at what the difference between the middle or the low ocean option is, you could check either of these boxes. From the potential ocean options downward, basically for each action, you should only check one box. So you should not check, for example, both the middle ocean option and the low ocean option because you can only select one of those two choices. It's organized by each marine area and time period. So maybe first on the screen here, we have Marine Area 5. in the summertime. It goes in numerical order in the scenarios that we're looking at. And for Marine Area 5, there's a number of options here. We have in the first and second management scenarios here, you can see that we're looking at what last year's season would be, updated to use our different modeling methods to take a look at that. And each modeling method produces a slightly different result. The one that tends to be best for Marine Area 5 in terms of predictive power is using an effort scaler. And so you can see what it would change what last year's quota is, which is represented in this row 21. Last year's quota was 3906, and last year's catch was 3540. If we model last year's season as an effort scaler, it would say that the quota that we actually need is around 4,250, so a slight increase from our quota last year. However, there are different methods of looking at this, and if we wanted to, we could look at last year's season, but based on a run size regression. So that uses the Puget Sound run size and what we've seen historically in terms of a catch per day at a given run size, and tries to predict with the run size that we have this year how that quota would shake out. And you can see in that situation, there's a slightly higher quota. For each of the scenarios, I tried to provide a mix of, for each of the areas, I tried to provide a mix of options, some that are slight increases, some that are slight decreases. And so in this case here, we do see there is an option here of modeling at a reduced quota. Moving onward into Marine Area 5, we have some different options to look at here. As I'm looking at the modeling, Marine Area 5 is one of the largest impactors on Nooksack Springs in the non-treaty fleet. So this is one that I think we'll have some discussions around this coming year. We have a number of different options to look at modeling Marine Area 5 in winter on screen here. And if you're interested, you can play around by putting an X in each of these boxes. Moving into Marine Area 6, this was one that had a relatively healthy quota last year. It was, I think, the largest quota that we had in Puget Sound. 72.58 was what we had, and we observed a catch of 54.29. As we're moving into this year, we're just looking at different methods to update that quota. And once again, a different range of options here. We do find that for Marine Area 6, it tends to have a lower impact on Stillaguamish and maybe some of the other key stocks, such as Nooksack, relative to some of our other marine areas. Area 7 summer is a tricky one, because in Area 7 summer, it's one of the ones where we've seen some of the largest reductions in terms of time on the water, but also some of the largest increases in terms of catch per day needed to run the same seasons. So we have kind of a few different options here, looking at ranging between a 6-day opener, which is what we had last year, what was realized in season, to a 15-day opener. And you can see between kind of that second option here and the first option, as that quota changes, you can see what the change to Stillaguamish non-treaty mortalities is. This has been one of the main constraining factors on Area 7 summer in recent years. We wanted to look at a few winter options as we were going through our modeling exercise. I think particularly when we had the meeting on March 1st, we heard Marine Area 8 is something that we should look at in terms of a winter fishery. So we have those two options here. You will notice that I've just modeled a quota of 1,000 for exploratory purposes. Both of these fisheries haven't been open since around 2019, and we have seen a big change in effort since that time period. For example, in Marine Area 5, the catch per day that we would have in a winter fishery in Marine Area 5 has increased fivefold. So if we were to use those same values from 2019, we might run into problems trying to model Marine Area 7 and 8. One of the problems that we would run into if we had a quota of approximately 1,000 fish in these areas is that if it were only open for a short period, say maybe only a few days or maybe a week, we would run into problems staffing the sampling team, as it can be pretty tough to have a sampling team only out there for a week's time period. So I think I won't talk too much about Marine Areas 9 and 10 here. Marine areas 9 and 10 were both ones that we reduced near the end of the process last year, the modeling process last year, because they're two of the areas that have a higher impact on Snohomish particularly. Given that Snohomish is going to be a bit of a constraining stock again, you can see how some of the changes that are in the sheet could potentially affect Snohomish. For Marine Area 10 in the winter, one thing that we wanted to look at was looking at a non-retention period between November 1st and 15th. I think that's something that we've heard as a suggestion from some of the public. It does look like it's relatively benign in terms of Chinook impacts on our key stocks. It doesn't look like there's too much of an increase for adding that period in the modeling. Marine Area 11 is one that we've been focusing on a lot recently. Some of the modeling or some of the scenarios that Ty put out, some of the ideas for management there could be something that we could employ. There is something else that I wanted to highlight. Particularly Art Tatchell has been emailing back and forth and had some suggestions for Marine Area 11 in the summertime. So we took a look at these here in the modeling tool. One thing that I thought was particularly promising was adding a buffer to the sublegal to legal ratio. And this is the ratio that we use to model the number of sublegals that we might encounter in a fishery relative to the number of legal-sized fish. In this scenario, I used a sublegal to legal ratio of 1.26, i.e., encountering 1.26 sublegals for every legal. And this was our highest observed rate in the last 6 years. I believe it was in 2018. It is relatively low on the impacts for some of our key stocks here, and might be a way at trying to reduce the likelihood that we close down due to that sublegal category. There are a few other options here if you're interested in exploring Marine Area 11, but maybe we'll also look at the July to September period down below, where I've also applied a buffer to look at. Like Marine Area 10, we explored a scenario of November 1st through 15th as non-retention in the winter. And like Marine Area 10, it didn't seem like it was particularly costly on a lot of our Chinook stocks of concern. Lastly, in the meeting on March 1st, I think we heard from the public an interest in exploring in this tool some scenarios for Snohomish in river. So myself and Yi have worked with the regional biologist in the area, and we have a range of scenarios to look at here. Just one thing I would note is what's in the original proposal right now is 320 unmarked encounters and 804 marked encounters. This represents 68 days of fishing, a full season. This is very different from what we had last year. Last year, we had 43 unmarked encounters and 83 marked encounters. So I do think that since Snohomish is going to be a stock of concern this year, maybe one of the more conservative packages in this grouping might be one that makes a little bit more sense to come down on that Snohomish ER, which is going to come out well above where we need to be, I think, in our first model runs. So I think that's a summary of kind of where we're at with this modeling tool. Hopefully, folks can do a little bit of exploration on their own and see if there's a combination of actions that make sense to them. I do have some thoughts on ones that might make sense to me, but maybe maybe I'll just take a quick pause there and see if there's any questions from the crowd. And one thing I wanted to say also was I think we heard feedback from Larry on March 1st that it would be really nice to have kind of impacts per 1,000 in this. I was working on this modeling tool till 11 last night, and I didn't have the steam to quite get there, Larry. I apologize for that.
Let me grab a microphone so the folks online can hear you.
What about adding an option for restoring the winter fishery in Area 6?
So I guess I could talk a little bit more about why I chose the different areas that I chose here. Marine Area 6 was one that had a good impact on Snohomish and Stillaguamish, but the main thing is that it was the winter fishery that had the second highest impact on Nooksack Springs. So as I've been looking at winter fisheries, and knowing that I think that there's going to be a lot of scrutiny, particularly on that Marine Area 5 winter fishery in this coming year, I've been trying to look at options that have a reduced impact on Nooksack Springs and either kind of a neutral or reduced impact on Snohomish and Stillaguamish particularly. As I've been looking at those scenarios, I think Marine Area 8 is one that kind of fits the bill. There's a chance that we could make that impact neutral on Stillaguamish and Snohomish, and has very low Nooksack impacts in there. The problem with Marine Area 8 is that it still has those Stillaguamish and Snohomish impacts, and it is also the area that's right out front of 3 of our stocks of concern this year, being Stillaguamish, Snohomish, Skagit. So that one I think would be kind of a tough one, but I think it's one that we wanted to take a little bit of a look at in the scenario modeling tool.
We have a hand online, Mark, if you don't mind. Zach, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I think the stock analysis tool uploaded to the website and linked in the chat is a PDF instead of being a spreadsheet. So we can't actually put the X's in and get the numbers to update. So I'm sure that was just like a save as issue, but just wanted to put that out there so if someone could get a chance to change that, it'd be a little bit easier to work with. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach, and thanks for bringing it to our attention. I'm going to look to the back of the room to our communication staff to see if they can get that reposted as an Excel file. And it looks like Kelly says that it'll just take one moment here, and that should be up, Zach. Thank you.
Derek, just make sure you're speaking into the mic too.
Apologies. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Derek, the term non-retention, I'm talking to the November 1st through 15th, winter fisheries that you're looking at. Could I redefine that as catch and release?
Well, I guess, so these were scenarios that Mark had asked me to look into. I think the intention was it targeting coho or chum? It was targeting chum. So if it's kind of the nuance and the terminology here is typically a Chinook catch and release fishery is when it's only open to catching and releasing Chinook, but not retention of any other
No,
species.
you've answered my question. It's in conjunction with opening it up for other fisheries of stocks that we can keep.
Correct.
Thank you.
Appreciate you putting this together, Derek. I'm very supportive of the Art Tatchell proposal to buffer those sublegal impacts. Obviously more quota would be nice down there in Area 11. With the constraints we're facing this year, I don't see a whole lot of likelihood for that happening, but buffering those sublegals looks like it's pretty efficient on impacts. And since that's been the factor that's been closing us down, it'd be nice to see that happen.
Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah, good morning, Derek. Thanks. Yeah, and I understand the workload you guys are facing, so no problem on that. I just, for the folks in the room here and then online, I want to reiterate the need for us to understand the cost of the fishery. And that is, we can look at the box and see what the impact is on Stillaguamish, but the ancillary side of that is the number of fish we're going to be able to access using those impacts. And that's obviously time on the water as well. So I just think it provides us with an informed process moving forward. Some fisheries are much more expensive than others. And without that tool, I think it makes it difficult for us to, and again, I'm not advocating for only the fisheries that are, going to result in the largest opportunity to target hatchery fish or harvestable fish. But I think it's a good starting place. So I would hope that it's a high priority down the road when you have some time so we can dig into that.
Well, Larry, I guess I would say I really, this is one that I really did want to get to, and I didn't have time to incorporate it into the scenario tool, but I actually do have an impacts per 1,000 across our sport fisheries. I looked at it in terms of the 2019 postseason fram run. The reason why I looked at it in that year was because that was a year that had many of our winter fisheries. So if I wanted to evaluate the impact of those winter fisheries per 1,000 fish, then I thought that would be a good year to look at. So if we'd like, we can put that up on screen in a moment here and take a look. But keeping in mind that if we do look at that, that isn't directly this run that we have right now. And there could be some small things that change, such as age composition or abundances of certain stocks that could potentially affect that a little bit either way.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. On the Snohomish options that you modeled there, can you go back down there again real quick? I'm wondering if there's, yeah, is it possible to, okay, so you do have the mid-June opener to July. Okay, I wasn't sure if I saw that one in there or not. Is that one's modeled as the highest impact, even higher than the option one? Is that am I reading that right?
No, as we're looking at this column on, as we're looking at Snohomish, it would be this column right here.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that when there's a negative number there, that means it's a decrease relative to the base scenario. So the base scenario here being modeling 320 unmarked encounters, 804 marked encounters, 68 days of fishing. And when we look at this scenario that begins in mid-June, this is actually, out of all the options, this is the lowest impact. You can see that it's about 1/3 of the encounters of the base scenario in terms of unmarked fish. And once again, you kind of already highlighted, but it starts in mid-June and goes through early July. To my understanding, talking to the regional biologists, that time period tends to be kind of the peak of the fishery, but this is shortened in duration relative to some of the other scenarios we've got up here.
So I guess I was a little confused because I thought the full fishery was not part of the SUSER. Or is putting full fishery from 2022 back in there how you get to 10.6% on there, or how's that? How does that work? Are we at 8.3 with the full river fishery, or?
I had this second potential option up here, where it was updating all the non-recreational fishery inputs in Puget Sound, those provided by the regional biologist. I think it's mislabeled. It should be all the non-recreational and non-marine fishery inputs. I did go ahead and update where we had terminal area inputs for sport in
Okay.
here. So this is representing kind of what the regional biologists provided as kind of a starting look, and it is greatly increased relative to last year.
So 10.6 includes the full freshwater season, and it goes down by -0.7 if you look at option 4 over there.
Yep. So we could look here, and if we put an X in this box for option 4, then it comes down to 9.9.
Cool. Thanks.
Just a reminder to folks online, you can raise your hand at the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen.
Are there Chinook non-retention impacts modeled in there for coho and game fish seasons as well?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part? Are there Chinook non-retention impacts where?
Modeled into that Snohomish ER for coho season and game fish? Or is that, are the impacts that we're looking at there just for the summer Chinook fishery?
I believe that what we're looking at here is specifically for the Skycomish Chinook directed portion of the fishery. There is a different input that we use that's for outside of that time period, say if there's fishing for coho and pinks in the main stem. But I guess I would look to see, I don't know if Pete Verhey is online, if he could just confirm or correct that if I was incorrect.
Okay, thanks.
Are we waiting for Pete? Oh, thanks.
Derek, this is Pat Patillo. I really appreciate the work that you do, your team. Modeling. Tools and the access of a tool to look at different options if you're really facing the requirement to have huts in fisheries. You certainly need some options. But it seems like we ought to start in a different place this year. That as a strategy for the sport fishery in Puget Sound, we ought to pursue a first model run that has actually an increased impact over last year for Stillaguamish. We had approximately 3.5% exploitation rate of the 9% total with last year's fishery. And so less than 50% of the total allowable impact of Stillaguamish. This is natural, unmarked Stillaguamish. And so I wonder if it's not, why it's not pursued by the department, the full 50% of the 9% impacts. And maybe you could help explain that, but it does seem that pursuing that as an option at this time, as a starting point, is an important strategy. If the allocation between the tribes is 50% for these most constraining impacts, Stillaguamish, then that seems like you've got to at least explore fishery options that will deliver that. I think that looking at a change in the seasons from last year, so without getting into all kinds of details about winter fisheries and summer fisheries in different areas, that a starting point is to solidly support the last year's Chinook fisheries in Puget Sound and consider adding fisheries, preferably in the winter, for areas 7, 8.1, 8.2, and 9. Examine the potential of having very small increased fisheries. Well, that's increased from 0, of course. So very small fisheries in the wintertime. So we've shared that proposal with the department as advisors and looking at very small quotas in those fisheries. And I'm not sure what the impact would be, but I doubt that the proposals would take you over 4.5% or 50% of the 9% for Stillaguamish. So that's a proposal that I hope that you would at least look at. The confusion for a lot of people here today is, and in the North of Falcon process, is that that they were surprised by the fact that there are other stocks than Stillaguamish that are potentially most constraining, such as Nooksack Springs and or Snohomish. Now we understand that that's the potential always that there are stocks with lower forecasts, but we think that probably the Stillaguamish will end up being the most constraining. And if you consider the reductions that have occurred since Stillaguamish has been the most constraining stock, that's at least since 2017, you'll see that the reductions in non-treaty fisheries have been dramatic. Across all of the natural stocks, the 12 natural stocks in Puget Sound, the average in the period of time since ESA has been over 60% reduction across all 12 of those natural stocks. That's not the case for tribal fisheries. Tribal fisheries have increased for many of those stocks, and the average reduction, well, there isn't an average reduction in those weak stocks, the wild stocks for tribal fisheries. They've actually increased. So this becomes confusing when you see that information to the public because, well, it raises the question of how we share the impacts. Now, then that takes us back to Stillaguamish, which at least for that stock, or really the hatchery and the wild stock, there has been a sharing arrangement that gives us a better idea of how to address the conservation problem. But when you raise the and I'm not saying you, but when these stocks, other stocks are raised as conservation issues that need to be addressed, we're stuck with, oh, well, how will we share them? And there isn't an explicit objective for sharing for those other stocks, unless we use the Stillaguamish as an example and sharing it 50-50. Well, that's at least a starting point in negotiations, and but it's not available to us. We have, as the citizens, trying to participate meaningfully in constructing sport fisheries in Puget Sound. We're left with a bit of an exasperated feeling that we don't have objectives, as you mentioned and described, or was described, that there are the management objectives for stocks that are maybe critical this year, such as Snohomish and Nooksack, are still unavailable. They're not defined. That's really frustrating when we know that the resource management plan, how many years people have been working on it, from the department, from the tribes, to construct a resource management plan, and then to be facing a management year like this, and we don't have management objectives. So it's very frustrating. So I can't take over the microphone any further. I'll leave you with some of those thoughts. You have our proposals for changes to be considered, and I think I'm speaking for more than people than just myself, that this is, that people understand how difficult it is, the position you're in reaching agreement with the tribes, but it leaves the public in a situation of exasperation about how to participate meaningfully in the decision process. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. There was a lot there. I wanted to respond to just a couple things. That's okay. I wanted to respond to just a couple things that you'd mentioned. First of all, on kind of our starting proposal, I am anticipating that we'll start above where we think we might need to be at the end for Stillaguamish. We're intending that we might target somewhere around the 70 mortality range rather than the 63 as a starting point. Once again, I think that's really important at the very least for wiggle room. But one comment that you had, that you think that Stillaguamish might be the most constraining stock, I do not think that Stillaguamish will be the most constraining stock this year. I know that we take, in these modeling exercises, we take a look at Stillaguamish, and in this case, in this year, because we're in that discussion status for Snohomish and Nooksack Springs, it's kind of hard to take a look at those stocks. As I'm doing modeling scenarios, one of the things that I wanted to look at was, we made some reductions at the end of last year to benefit Snohomish. We had changes to the quota in Marine Area 5, 9, and 10. And as we look at those potential scenarios of increasing those areas, I worry a little bit about the Snohomish impacts that we might have in those. I'm not exactly sure where we'll end out on these starting scenarios. That was kind of one of the options that I was looking at, is bolstering some of those areas that had been decreased relative to last year. But we had made those reductions last year to benefit Snohomish, and I think it will be hard to kind of go back to buffering some of those same fisheries.
I guess the other comment I'd make, Pat, is none of these natural stocks are doing any better than they have been since they were first listed under the ESA. And there is no defined sharing under ESA either. So those are the kind of things that we're facing as we try to navigate this landscape. I know there's a question online as well.
Kurt, you can go ahead. Kurt, I've prompted you to unmute. Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to Kurt if there's another question in the room.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. Alex Van Hine here. Derek, can you have quick access to what the non-treaty mortalities were on the Still-Squamish for the final package in 2022?
1 second. In 2022.
Correct. So not last year, a year before.
Can do. I'll look at that now. It is very dependent on abundances, what that number is going to shake out as, because it all translates to mortality rate. So it's going to be basically what results in half of the allowable mortality rate. But
Right. So I just want to know what the final package had us at on that non-treaty mortality.
in 2022, it was 63.3 mortalities. For
Okay. So very similar to what you're proposed here.
And it was a very similar forecast looking at it. It looks like in
Yep.
2022, the forecast was 983.
Yep. We did have 161 more naturals forecasted in 2022 than we, or excuse me, in 2024 than we did in 2022. So I was just curious if that number might reflect the increase in natural forecast that we have this season.
I think that I think that the number of mortalities will be very similar, even if there's a change in the number of natural mortalities, because a lot of the fisheries, they're acting as a rate. If there's a higher abundance in the marine areas, for example, you would if the rate of fishing doesn't change, if the effort is similar between the two time periods, then you would expect to catch more of that stock under or encounter, in the terms of a mark selective fishery on a natural stock, encounter that stock in higher numbers if you were at the same rate and the higher abundance, if that makes sense.
Yep. I would echo Pat's message there. I mean, in line with how we do this every year, where we try to kind of start on the high end of the mortalities and then chip away as needed. That I think we also should be managing and modeling to the high end, or of what our allowable impacts are to begin with before we start decreasing those. So, thank you.
This is NOF for dummies here. For me, I need to ask a clarification concerning the conversation that Pat was having with you, Mark, and that's this. In my mind, the Bolt decision divided the fish 50-50, and that is as it is. But then, when you made the comment about there is no defined sharing on ESA listed fish, is that because it came after the Bolt decision and the Bolt decision doesn't apply?
My interpretation, Norm, is that the Bolt decision provided 50-50 sharing on harvestable surplus, right? So basically those fish that were available to harvest above and beyond the goals for escapement. That's not defined under ESA. ESA came after the Bolt decision. There's never been adjudication in court about how those fish are shared. That's always been between the co-managers on how those are split. And specifically, I guess I'm thinking about Still-Squamish and Snohomish. They're in the same management unit. And Derek can correct me if I'm wrong, but the state takes a bigger percentage of Snohomish than we do Still-Squamish.
That is correct. We take in most years in the preseason, we have well above 50% of the Snohomish impacts in non-treaty. Of course, on Still-Squamish, because we're managing to 50-50 impacts, then there's equal sharing there. The other one in the management unit is Tulalip, which is typically a little bit more weighted toward the tribes. But when you look at that's an example of one kind of management region. When you look across Puget Sound, there are ones that were under 50% on. There are ones that were above 50% on. And so it would make it, I think it would be more restrictive to marine fisheries if we tried to get to 50-50 on every single stock. Because say for Snohomish, that would require really large reductions in the marine area to get there.
So I'm concerned that we start going down this road and push an equal sharing on each management unit and what that may mean for marine area fisheries. That's my concern.
Pat Patillo again. I really didn't want to have this, my comments, cause a descending of this forum into allocation. That's not my intention. It was specifically with Stillaguamish, recognizing that 50% had been defined for that stock for recent year management decisions. And let's pursue that as an option to start with or a position in the negotiation. The fact is that very clearly under US v. Washington, the Bolt decision, the state and the tribes can negotiate departures from 50% that meet their needs, meet their objectives for fisheries, and share the burden of conservation. So that's not an argument that we can have, and certainly not, it is not appropriate to have it during a North of Falcon annual meeting for the public to get into demanding 50% for every stock. Nobody's doing that. I would caution some of you who are making statements about the management units for Puget Sound that you're misrepresenting what is in the Puget Sound Salmon Management Plan of 1985 that still is an existing management plan and endorsed by the state and the tribe co-managers. For example, the history of Tulalip Bay and the production there, all of Stillaguamish and Snohomish are part hatchery and wild. Tulalip, Wallace, etc., are all part of the management and allocation unit for the Stillaguamish and Snohomish region. So, but just forget that stuff. I mean, we're clearly in a different era now. I really do think, though, that it's important to look at more than one stock to see how the burden of sharing, the conservation burden, is being shared, and the importance of accessing hatchery fish that are harvestable, clearly harvestable under ESA or not. That is what we're seeking here. We're seeking access to harvestable and abundant hatchery fish and trying to maximize that amount. So let's get to work here and focus on that. Let's not get into fights over allocation.
Hey, Mark, it looks like we have a hand online. Hank, you can go ahead.
Yeah, just looking at the management tool, I see that it's labeled high ocean option, and it has me wondering if or how much of an impact the different ocean options have on this modeling and the what we would have for allowable impacts in Puget Sound.
Thanks for that. So I did build into the modeling tool. If you scroll down to row number 17, here's the potential ocean options. I used the high ocean option as a base scenario, but if you'd like, you can go in and see how those ocean options affect the stocks of concern. I do know particularly for the ones that we've got this year, Stillaguamish, Nooksack, and Snohomish, there tends to be a relatively low impact in those ocean fisheries, but there is some. So you can play around with those options and see how it might change the ERs for each of the key stocks.
Derek, Pat again. On that ocean options though, those are combined, what you're looking at as differences, those are combined. The changes between, of non-treaty and tribal troll fishery, right?
Oh, sorry.
I think there, the most of the, for Stillaguamish anyway, I did look at that. The difference is about 0.4% from about 9 to 9.4 across the range. I think most of that is the change in the treaty troll fishery. I mean, that's kind of obvious because we know that Puget Sound Chinook are caught more to the north, and that's pretty much the where all of the treaty troll fishery is occurring. So that's where the impact is. There are small nominal changes, but I don't think they're more than 0.1% for non-treaty fisheries in the ocean.
That's exactly right, Pat. And that thanks for adding that point. When you look at the distribution of where those fisheries are occurring, the treaty fishery versus the non-treaty fishery, most of our impacts in the ocean tend to be in Marine Area 2. We definitely have some in 3 and 4, and we definitely have some in 1 as well. Marine Area 2 being the Westport area. The tribal troll fishery is more concentrated around Nia Bay. So what we typically see in the modeling, Area 3 and 4. So what we typically see in the modeling is we typically see kind of a higher impact on Columbia stocks in the non-treaty fisheries, and we see kind of a higher impact on Puget Sound stocks in the treaty fisheries. So that was completely correct and a good point there, Pat.
And we have someone online. Zachary, go ahead.
Hey, thank you for getting the updated stock analysis tool uploaded. So just looking at this Snohomish number, or really, I guess, more lack thereof, I'm just hoping that we can get some more clarity on that. I mean, obviously, you can't give me right now, but this is more, you know, requesting as that you guys can get that Snohomish number dialed in sooner than it happened last year. I know that's obviously not purely within your control, but just last year it felt like a little bit that came out right at the end, and as a result, all of the sort of representative analysis and considerations, sort of looking at all these stocks, it wasn't wasted by any means, but it certainly wasn't representative of what the final package could look like. And so I just would, or if there's any guidance you can give on where that number likely ends up, just so that I feel like I'm not, you know, sort of shooting blindly here.
Thank you, Zachary. And so that Snohomish number, we had a meeting last week with our co-managers when we were at PFMC on this one. I think the next step is that as we've started those discussions, we're going to be exploring modeling scenarios. I believe, I'm going to look at Mark for a head nod, but I believe we're getting back together on Friday to discuss for Snohomish. So hopefully we'll have a better update on exactly where we might be at there soon. I do think that last year we were at an 8.3% management objective. That's when we're above the lower bound threshold. I think that we're probably going to be somewhere that's less than 8.3 in the coming year.
Derek, can you remind us, I believe in 2022, we were also at that lower threshold and had to be below 8.3. And do you remember where we were in 22?
I think in 2022, we did manage that 8.3%. Let me just take a quick check on my other screen here.
So Zachary, maybe to specifically answer your question, in our preliminary conversations with the co-managers, I think we wanted to model out an initial package from the co-managers and look and see where we're at. I think the indication that we got from the co-managers is let's see where we're at and see where we need to get relative to being at or below the 8.3.
I wanted to correct something that I'd said there, which it does look like in 2022 we were below the lower bound, but it looks like our final exploitation rate was 6.8%. So we were well below that 8.3. Looking at the modeling run from 2022, it looks like we were mostly restricted by Stillaguamish, and Stillaguamish and Snohomish tend to be caught in very similar areas. So that probably changes that we made for Stillaguamish benefited Snohomish so that it wasn't the focus of discussions then.
And we have another hand online from Travis. Travis, go ahead.
Hi there. I was just curious if you guys are, when you guys have your co-manager meetings with the treaty tribes, are those going to be open to the public or are they still closed door?
Travis, those are government to government meetings. They are not open to the public.
So we can't get any transparency with an open conference to that?
No.
And why is that?
As I just stated, they are government to government meetings. Does the governor publicize his meetings when he goes to meet with foreign leaders? No.
And we have a hand from Carl online. Carl, go ahead.
Thank you. Most of these discussions have all been around, Chinook fisheries and modeling adjustments. And I had a question. Has the department, been playing, have you had a chance to, I guess, how can I say this? Have we already adjusted for, effort adjustments from 2023 in the numbers we're looking at in our coho fisheries and how they affect the Chinook numbers in releases? So I'm just concerned about our overall fisheries in marine waters are very popular. And as we get these smaller and smaller seasons, then we get, the effort gets concentrated and we have enormous pressure and there's a lot of release and there's mortality associated with that. And I just want to know if we're going to get any surprises on effort adjustment from 2023 when we run our first model, or if that's already been calculated in what we're looking at right here.
Thanks, Carl. I can take a stab at that one. So, in terms of particularly, we did a reevaluation of our Chinook non-retention this year. We have about 3 years of data where we've had more intensive monitoring in some of those coho fisheries, and they help us to get better estimates of what the Chinook non-retention impacts are during the period. I'd give a shout out to one of my new staff, Colin Edwards. I'm not sure if he's on the line today, but he helped to kind of compile some of those estimates and put those together. As we updated the Chinook non-retention inputs for 2024 for the modeling tool, you kind of caught me because I was remembering on my drive in this morning that we had a special adjustment we were going to do, particularly for Marine Area 10 time step 2, in time step 2 being the May to June period. In June, we saw a much higher number of Chinook non-retention encounters in Area 10 than we had seen in previous years, and it was higher than we had in the preseason modeling. So there was one special adjustment that we were going to do for this year to try to account for that uptick that we saw in 2023. That is not included in the modeling tool yet, but it's something that we're going to take a look at and put in. It's going to be a priority for what we put in, I think. So that'll be yet to come.
And maybe Carl, I'll take a line from Ty unless he wants to come up to the front of the room. But we've already made those adjustments in the coho modeling. So Ty updated the recent year averages that go into the modeling for this year. So those reflect some of the recent year increases that we've seen in both effort and catch in the coho fisheries as well. Other questions online or in the room? Floor is yours, Norm.
Have we gotten to freshwater fisheries yet, Mark? Take it away. Specifically the Skokomish River. I told you yesterday I was going to ask this question publicly. And I thought about it more last night before I got here and this morning driving in here. I'm hoping we will see an in-river Chinook fishery this year on the Squamish River. I know the director has been talking with tribal leadership there. We don't know what the results of that negotiation was or is. I would think that there would have been an announcement if there had been a positive result today. But I think we need to carve out something. And if that means we have to think outside the box on this, then I really think we need to consider it thinking outside of the box on this and opening up any area in river that will not upset our co-managers in terms of trespass, but giving us the ability to harvest our marked fish so we don't have thousands of surplus fish there coming in there at George Adams. So I'm hoping you folks are looking at really some creative fisheries in there. You're talking to a guy that I think a dip net fishery would be great, but that's been explained to me that that's probably not on the table for years. And that's okay. The public can take a turn on that. But some type of access below the hatchery, something that we can start getting a limited number of people an opportunity to fish that river for Chinook salmon. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Norm. Unfortunately, I don't have any update other than, as I said at the first meeting, the director did meet with tribal leadership. They had discussions. I believe we shared a fishing proposal. We developed several proposals, so I'm not sure which one was shared. I could get back with you on that if I can find that out. You know, Norm, I think it's going to be a continued ongoing discussion. I'm probably not hopeful for that this year. It is going to be something that the state continues to work on with the Squamish tribe. We don't have agreement on, you know, it's really a land dispute, a boundary dispute, and who owns the river, really. And so we'll continue those discussions. You know, I'm always a little optimistic that we might be able to come to some sort of compromise at some point in the future, but my gut's telling me we're not there this year.
Hey, Mark, we have a hand online from Kurt. Kurt, go ahead.
I think I figured it out. Thank you.
We can hear you.
Okay, first I turned the Pat's proposal to start high and go low. For the folks that aren't advisors, we only get a couple days to get a shot at this, and I think the process and our discussions become more fruitful if we start at the most realistic modeling effort we think we have. And if it turns out we've got some room to play with, we can easily agree on how to add some more fish. But typically, if we have aspirational fisheries modeled and we're down to the last day, and we try to make, you know, where we all are involved, make adjustments, it gets really, really difficult. And I just think it becomes a little bit more efficiency, but that's maybe as much as style as substance, but that's just my thoughts there. But I agree with Derek that when I looked at the numbers, I thought the Snohomish would be the problem. And my understanding is that the Snohomish fish are modeled off of the Wallace hatchery fish. And part of the problem there is the Skycomish summers are a much different fish than the Snoqualmie falls. For example, the Wallace hatchery has half of its brood stock in the rack, past the rack, by the end of July, and they're done spawning by roughly the 1st of October. The Snoqualmie falls are a true fall fish. In fact, to my knowledge, they're the latest spawning population in Puget Sound. And it's not uncommon if we have water conditions to see those fall fish spawning at Thanksgiving. I've seen live fish in the Snoqualmie as late as December, almost Christmas. I don't know that buys us much relief in the mixed stock fisheries, because what you have is what you have. But I think it might give you some opportunities to craft some in-river fisheries in the Skycomish proper to access what's getting to be a growing abundance of hatchery fish. You know, I think, was it 4 years ago, 3 years ago, they increased the Wallace / Toledo hatchery production from like 5.4 million to over 8 million smolts. I mean, there's getting to be more hatchery fish. We need to figure out how to best catch those. And, you know, and it also becomes an issue in coho time. If we're concerned about snoqualmie fish, maybe we can craft earlier coho opportunities in the Skycomish where those snoqualmie fish are less likely to be. But those are just some initial thoughts on considerations for this planning effort. And thanks for your time.
I was just reviewing this is Kyle Toll here. I was reviewing some of the material from last year, and there was a statement from the department that the salmon population's natural origin would continue to be depressed without dealing with the pinniped predator issue in Puget Sound. And I'm just wondering if we get an update on that at any point through the North of Falcon process of where we're at in that whole process of having solutions to that issue.
Thanks for that. I'm not sure that we have the right staff in the room to go there today, but based on your feedback, we'll try to have an update at least available for one of our Zoom meetings next week or at the North of Falcon 2 meeting in Linwood. We'll connect with our marine mammal folks and see if we can get an update.
We have another hand online from Doug. Doug, go ahead.
You got me?
Yeah, we got you.
Hey guys, Doug St. Denis, Washington State Guides Association. Appreciate your effort and time on all of this. In regards to the Skycomish River summer fishery, I know that we had very, very limited days last year. What's the level of concern that these hatchery fish coming upriver, if anglers aren't out there fishing for them, that they're not making it back to the hatchery and they're actually spawning in river?
Doug, this is Edward. Great question. That particular stock is an integrated stock, and so there could be benefit to that wild stock if they did spawn in the river. So it's a unique one where we've been spending a lot of time, where in the past we had a fall Chinook stock there and we moved away from that, and we now have this integrated stock. So there would be some benefit. Great question.
Thank you, Edward.
We have another hand online from Zach. Zach, go ahead.
Appreciate it. Sorry for coming back with multiple rounds here. But so looking at the stock analysis tool, if I sort of check every box that reduces Snohomish, the lowest I can get is 9.3%. And I'm just sort of and when in doing that, I end up at only about 57 Stilly-Moores. And so I think that fits with what you mentioned about that you think that the Snohomish is really likely to be the constraining stock here for us. And just with some back of the napkin math, it looks like that area 9 summer and area 11, particularly in the May to June period, but also in the July to September period, have really low Snohomish impacts relative to overall catch, which area 9 surprises me a little bit, but area 11, not certainly less so. And so I would just say, encourage that if we do find some slack in those areas when it comes to Stilly and Snohomish, so I know that those fish do tend to travel together, that we just sort of take the opportunity that if it presents itself to crank on those, increase those fisheries. I think this is sort of echoing what was said earlier about, really looking at the cost of the various fisheries. And if that means that the allocation relative to most years or relative to previous years, shifts around a little bit, I think that it's worth considering, worth taking the opportunity to find the value given the constraining stock for a given year. So I would just say, looking at that, looking at this, the Area 9 summer was one that sort of jumped out to me as particularly one that has higher Still-Iguamish but lower Snohomish. So in a situation where Stilly is maybe less binding, that Area 9 quota could get some love. Yeah.
Thanks, Zach. And I just want to say I really appreciate in a lot of these public meetings, you kind of go through this tool and really look at different scenarios and are considering the options here. A lot of what you're looking at is some of the same things that I'm looking at in terms of trying to reach kind of that 70 mortality goal for Still-Iguamish in the first run. I see that I'm trying to find places that have a limited impact on Snohomish, and some of the places that I'm thinking about prioritizing as we're looking at that 70 Still-Iguamish mortalities would be we know that in Marine Area 11 there was issues last year in terms of how the fishery went. Looking at a little bit of a buffer to that sublegal legal ratio looks pretty painless in terms of most of the stocks of concern there. So I think that's one that we could be looking at, and that aligns kind of with the same thing that you saw there. I think that looking at, and then beyond that, some of the non-retention fisheries in Area 10 and 11 directed at chum in November, those seem like they're pretty low impact as well. And then beyond that, I'd like to take a close look at Marine Area 5, 9, and 10 and see kind of which one of those is the lowest Snohomish impact, kind of where we're at in terms of Still-Iguamish mortalities, and is there anything we can do for those areas that had a little bit of a decrease last year. I'm under no illusions that since those are three of the areas that we decreased for Snohomish last year, I'm under no illusions that that we'll be able to have large increases in any of those areas. I do think that we're going to be highly limited by Snohomish, but for a starting place, maybe something like that makes sense.
Yeah. To me, it looked like sort of if we set Area 5, Area 5 summer has sort of double the Area 9 summer, and then the Area 10 summer was in a similar range. And so it's just it's, you never know where these fish are swimming, but it seems like for whatever reason that they're maybe pushing through Area 9 relative to some other ones. But thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
So I saw in an earlier slide that there was some consideration being given, or you're asking for feedback on potentially managing June in Area 10 or in Area 11, how we are in the San Juans. And I don't want to see that happen. I think the rest of my Area 11 cohorts here don't want to see that happen. If there is a little bit of a buffer given to the sublegals, I think that will help prevent how last season went. Keep in mind, we did fish 2 of the 4 weeks last year, so we had 2 4-day openers. Traditionally, the CPUE drops the farther you get into June. And if we put a 3-day season on paper, I think it's just going to create panic mode, and we're going to go in there and burn those fish up early in the season. One thing I would consider, though, is we did fish both weekend days last year in June. So maybe we go Wednesday through Saturday or Sunday through Wednesday or some scenario like that, as opposed to just putting a 3-day season on paper with the option of reopening it.
You mind if I ask a follow-up? So I'd love to know either from you or Art about kind of relative to all the other fisheries that we're trying to deal with, how important is June to the Area 11 anglers? Loud and clear.
Okay, we have another hand online, Mark. Brett, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi guys. This is Brett Barkdahl. Before I get into the weeds here too much, I just wanted to ask a quick question. I think I heard you say earlier that Mark, that staff had a starting proposal for Puget Sound seasons. Is that correct?
So thanks, Brett. We have some things in mind. I think our original kind of starting place for this year was looking at last year and really just a few tweaks here and there. You know, mostly just around the edges of what we had last year.
Okay, were you gonna post that for us to react to, or how are you gonna present that?
So I think, and I'll let Derek speak if I get something wrong here. The plan of events as I see them is following this meeting, staff, managers and modeling staff will huddle up. We'll center on a final proposed package to move forward towards a co-manager model that's due to be put together today, and the modelers from the tribal side and the state side are going to get together, do an inside model, kind of our first inside model for this year. And then we'll go over those results tomorrow at a co-manager meeting.
Okay, so that would be something that you'd present at a later date then.
Well, so following the modeling and look at it tomorrow, we'll make sure to post all those materials on our website for public review.
Okay, thanks.
Did you have anything to add, Derek?
No, I think as we've been talking through each marine area and as we've been talking through the modeling tool, we've been kind of presenting what our thoughts are on each area. And we have some ideas on how we could make those changes. But as Mark said, we'll get together as a group afterwards and we'll take what we heard from public feedback and kind of discuss on what makes the most sense in terms of those initial proposals. Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to decide when was the appropriate time to get into the weeds on some of my comments.
Anytime you want, Brad.
This is Pat Patillo again. But listening to the discussion about Chinook, and I'd kind of like to move on to some coho issues and other non-Chinook issues. But before we leave Chinook, a little more discussion about the proposal that some of us have been making to the department for some winter fishing where there has been none in some areas. And so I just had mentioned that we had talked with the department, proposed adding some opportunity, very limited opportunity in areas 7, 8.1, 8.2, and 9, where it had been zeroed, as Derek, you mentioned, since the 1920 season. So what I am reading from the language here is that it isn't very likely that a proposal like that is going to be put into the starting package for WDFW and the tribes as they initialize the modeling of inside Puget Sound fisheries. I'm imploring you to at least put one of those areas in there for a kind of placeholder. I'm noting also remarks that my friend Kurt Kramer made, another long time seasoned veteran for North of Falcon, who understands that if you're unrealistic at the beginning of the North of Falcon, that you can come crashing down in a couple of weeks. Nobody likes that. But we don't really know what realistic means. And we also know that from history, from those seasoned veterans like Kurt, that if you don't put something out there early in the process, that you will never get that put into it later on. So I think your only chance to even explore any, I'll call it recovery of the winter fishery in Puget Sound, is to have an option with something in one of those areas. Because we had pushed it in Area 7 in the last few years, not 8.1, 8.2, and 9, and also because of the discussion that has occurred here, that you're presenting to us fairly, that Snohomish is a difficult challenge for this year, and it's more concentrated in some areas than others. And even the potential that because areas 8.2 and 8.1 are more proximal to Snohomish, that some people will be objecting to that, and that it's not contributing to a positive outcome if you increase fisheries there. Why not just pick one area then and with consistent with recent years, look at a very, very small fishery in the winter in March at the same time as the 10, 11 fisheries and try something there in the proposal. What I had suggested from looking at those most recent years with a winter fishery was that if you had a 2-day fishery per week in March, so something, I mean, minimize the potential impact by having it during the weekday. See if it's possible to conduct a fishery that's meaningful for people and keep the possibility alive that you could eventually have a winter fishery do something very small with a quota of about 250 fish in that. It seems like nothing. It seems like it would go just like that. Well, I really don't think that the data suggests that it will go just like that. It's very small indeed, but it seems like it's a strong message that the department supports the fishery, that it shouldn't be rejected just because it's been closed, or that there is something evil about blackmouth fisheries. Area 7 has a number of advantages. It has a very high, it has the highest of any area for winter fisheries or summer fisheries of adult to sublegal fish, so very low sublegal impact. It also, though it has impacts on Stillaguamish, both of course hatchery and natural with marked selective fisheries, I also have thought that it may be, if you're that small of an impact, it may be important to at least try to look at a non-selective fishery in Area 7 in the winter. 85% of the adult fish in that fishery are marked in the wintertime. It's got the highest mark rate of any fishery in Puget Sound, summer or winter, when they are open. So it is, in fact, selective by fishing there in the wintertime on marked hatchery fish. The cost of selective fisheries is high. You're obligated to set up sampling programs, test fisheries, in order to collect information on non-retention impacts. But you can have those test fisheries or not have them with a non-selective fishery. You don't need them in the same way that you need them for a selective fishery. So there is some way of cutting costs by having a non-selective fishery. And even if it's a side modeling project, looking at that's very small, still in that same number of 200, 250 fish, try it and see what the impacts are. It doesn't have to be something that you're proposing, but consider it. And so I urge you to not drop the winter fishery idea. Those are some thoughts that I have since our discussion yesterday about this. And don't let it all go keep it alive if you could, please. And thank you for that consideration.
Thanks, Pat. If I could make a response to some of the comments that you had there. The proposal that I think that Pat and others might have brought forward was looking at multiple winter marine areas at relatively low catch rates just to get some time back in the winter, even if it's at a relatively low magnitude. There's a few considerations I think that can be made when you're looking at winter fisheries in that way. The first one, you touched on it a little bit, is sampling. So in terms of sampling, when you have many across many marine areas, a very short window of time, it becomes very hard to put test fisheries in place and be able to evaluate those impacts in a short window and be able to produce estimates. It's also tough to hire sampling staff in a really short period of time. To say, if we had a concurrent opener for a weekend across many marine areas, in an area where we haven't been open historically, it's going to be very tough to find the staff to man those. And then you mentioned that if we ran non-selective fisheries, there might not be the same sampling requirements. I think that might have been true in the past, but we do have it outlined in the new RMP that anywhere where there's a Stillaguamish impact that's over 0.1, we're required to. One second, Pat. We're required to have sampling and in-season catch estimates of that area. I do want to just I have been looking very closely at winter fisheries, and I have the Larry Phillips special on screen now that I do want to talk through. But if you had a response to that, Pat, before I get to that.
Pat indicated he'd like to follow up with you after the meeting, Derek.
Okay. And so, Larry, this is what I had a chance to look at, and I think this is in line. I think with what you were mentioning before, not built into the scenario tool, but it is built in a scenario from 2019 where it looks at a range of winter options. In 2019, we were open in the winter time for Marine Area 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. As well as 10 and 11 and 13. And 12. So basically every area we had openings in the wintertime. That's why I looked at kind of this model run. What we're looking at on screen here is an unmarked mortalities, a number of unmarked mortalities per 1,000 MSF quota. And of course, as you're considering that metric, each stock has a different size. So the numbers are going to vary. Don't look at those numbers across stocks. You want to be looking at within a stock when you're evaluating the number of mortalities in fisheries. So we have right here kind of our what might be our three main constraining stocks this year: Nooksack Springs, Snohomish, and Stillaguamish. And this is kind of what I've been looking at as we consider marine fisheries. If we were going to propose something different, I think what would be the most realistically feasible approach would be one fishery that has that has a decent quota in it, so that it can stay open for kind of a little bit longer than just a single weekend. And as I've been looking at kind of where the impacts are, I mentioned this to Glenn earlier today, but one thing that really sticks out to me is there's really only one place in this coming year where we have a decent amount of Nooksack Spring impacts in our marine sport fisheries, which is Area 5 in the wintertime. As we're thinking about, as we do our crafting, as we're going through our negotiations, if there is a target on that marine Area 5 winter, is there a place where we could have trade that's relatively impact neutral or reduced on Snohomish and Stillaguamish that has some benefit to Nooksack? And there was a gentleman on the call that was asking about why I didn't look at Marine Area 6. Marine Area 6 is the second highest impact on Nooksack per 1,000 fish. And likewise, Marine Area 9, I think I didn't run a scenario for the same reason. But I was looking at Marine Area 7 and Marine Area 8. I think Marine Area 8 comes with a host of issues, particularly for the S rivers, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, Skagit. But out of those situations, at least mathematically from the modeling, that's a place where there's relatively low impacts on Nooksack. I think that we probably won't be including that in the starting proposal. We have to have discussions with our co-managers. But if there is a need to reduce Marine Area 5 for Nooksack, it might be possible to make some type of impact neutral transfer. pending discussion, of course, with the co-managers, and those would be quite difficult conversations, given that Area 8 is right out front of those S rivers. So just to give a little bit more transparency, I have put a lot of thought into the winter fisheries in what I've been doing. I know Mark and Ty and others have been doing the same, but that's kind of, that's the way that I've been thinking about the winter fisheries, Pat, for this coming year.
Okay, we have a hand online from Carl. Carl, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, going back, while we're still on Chinook, a few comments here. One was, you'd asked about the importance of June in Marine Area 11, and just to mirror that in Marine Area 10, I think, it is quite important, just based on the pressure, or the effort and participation that we saw the last couple of years in June in Marine Area 10. So I'm hopeful that you can keep that June 1st in the package if the effort adjustments don't throw it too far out of whack. And then, looking at the Puget Sound analysis tool, probably the single cheapest addition in there is that Marine Area 10 November. So definitely want to be on record saying that, I would urge the department to include that in the initial modeling adjustment to last year's package. When you build your first FRAM model run, I hope to see that November chum fishery included in the package in Marine Area 10 and hopefully in Marine Area 11 as well. It's slightly more expensive in 11, but it's still very, very small and it looks very affordable, and I don't see much of an argument against it. So hopefully we can include that in the package that you're considering. And yeah, I had one more comment there and I just drew a blank. So let's see, that was based around, I just can't pull it up out of my brain, but I will message you guys. But please include that Marine Area 11 chum. I really appreciate everything that you guys have done to pull all of these ideas together, and look forward to seeing how that what that model spits out and all of our challenges and how we're going to make it to the finish line. But good start today, guys. Thank you.
Hi, this is Norm Reinhardt, primarily from Area 10, but I want to speak to that June coho fishery. Right now, I have a group of individuals transferring 200,000 coho to a net pen in Agate Pass as volunteers. It's important to us, those coho. They contribute to our fishery. And there was about 10 of us there Monday, and I asked them this question: what's more important to you, your June coho fishery or your August Chinook fishery, your July, August Chinook fishery? And the answer I got back from all of them was that we'd like to keep our June coho fishery intact if possible, but we do not want to give up our Chinook. So that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is to deliver that message from sporting enthusiasts that yes, we want our coho, but I believe they put a bigger emphasis on later in the season taking Chinook.
Thanks, Norm.
We have a hand online from Kurt. Kurt, go ahead.
Thank you. Eric, you left the door open, so I have to make a comment. There is one fishery where the Snohomish and Stillaguamish fish separate quite well. And of course, that's in the freshwater. And so if we have some extra Still-Guamish fish, if once we take care of the Snohomish problem, that would not be an inappropriate place to think about that. I'm obligated to say that. And again, thank you, Derek, for the Larry Phillips table. That was very helpful.
Thanks, Kurt. We can circle up with Pete and look at fishery in Still-Guamish. I know that we've had game fish and coho in recent years. If Still-Guamish is not one of our main constrainers relative to Snohomish, then that's certainly an option.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again, Derek. So it's not up there, but, and I know, I don't recall us talking about it for a while now, but what about Marine Area 12? It looks like we're up on Skokomish numbers this year. I mean, obviously mid-hood canals are constraining challenge there, but any discussion about that would be appreciated. Options.
Mark, do you want to take this one or do you want me to?
Well, I can take it from my perspective. Right. You know, if you'll recall, the co-managers asked NOAA Fisheries in their next review to review that population status. And as part of that, the co-managers agreed that we wouldn't add any fisheries in the northern part of the canal until that decision had come down from NOAA. So from my perspective, it's not really an option for this year.
And then as a part of that as well, there was set timings that we were focusing on in terms of the seasons in that agreement to, I believe it was to stay off of the spring Chinook program particularly. No, wait, it was it the spring Chinook or there was a different run timing between some of the summers and falls? I'd have to go back and look, but I think that it does speak to the timing in the RMP as to when our fisheries can occur in Marine Area 12.
We have a hand online from, oh, never mind. He took it down. Never mind.
Other questions or comments in the room?
I'd just like to second the importance of looking at that freshwater fishery on the Skokomish, if there's any possible way to craft that without too many impacts. And this is Rob Larson.
Thanks, Rob.
And we have a hand online from Brett. Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys. This is Brett Barkdahl again. Well, so since you encouraged me to get into the weeds, I guess I'll get into the weeds a little bit on some of these fisheries. I guess I'm anticipating a season structure in area 7, 9, and 10, similar to last year, which would translate based on what we did last year to an opener on July 11th. That would be a Thursday. In my opinion, that's way too early for a couple of reasons. I guess I'll start with the biology reason first. A lot of the stocks, all three of the stocks that we're concerned about are migrating through the saltwater in July. By the 1st of August, almost all those fish in the Still-Guamish and the Nooksack are in river, or at least a higher percentage of those fish are in the river. You can't catch them in area 7, 9, or 10 if they're already in the river. It's really, really difficult. That would be my first reason for having the seasons open later in July. That's what I would propose. The second reason for doing that is it would allow more fish to pass into area 10. we got ourselves in trouble last year with unmarked encounters. Or I should say, sublegal encounters in area 10. There's no reason to do that, in my opinion. If everyone's a little bit patient, those fish will enter area 10 at starting, like I say, later you wait, the more fish are going to enter area 10, and you're going to have a much better ratio of legal to sublegal fish in area 10. So I guess my comment here is I think we should wait and open that fishery a little bit later. I guess I would even say the last week of June. But certainly we should wait until at least the 18th before those fisheries all open. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Brett.
And we have another hand online. Travis, go ahead.
Back to the Skokomish River, just a question on that, since there's some dispute going on with the tribe not wanting to let sports fishermen fish that river. What are the options for, if they don't want us to fish the river, what are the options of giving them the full harvest of those surplus fish going to George Adam hands, and in return giving a higher quota to a different marine area that has surplus fish? Has that been considered?
Hey, Travis. There aren't very many marine areas where I would say that Skokomish will be our main limiting stock in this coming year. Area 12 is mostly Skokomish stock, and that's one of the areas that could be limited as we reach management objectives on Skokomish. The other one that has pretty large impacts is Marine Area 6. Marine Area 6 in the summertime tends to have lower impacts on Stillaguamish, Snohomish, Nooksack relative to some of its adjacent areas. And part of that is because of the higher contribution of Hood Canal fish. But Marine Area 6 in the summertime is also one that tends to have a larger quota. It was one that last year had a quota that was around 7,200, and we only ended up using a little bit over 5,000 in terms of that quota. In Marine Area 12, I think it's in a similar situation where that one often runs a full season. So I think it would be difficult to increase our Skokomish impacts in the marine areas without running into management objectives for other stocks.
Derek or Mark, can you remind me, you said you're going to meet after today and you're going to put together a model run, and then that's going to get presented to co-managers this week? Tomorrow. Okay. Derek, do you mind giving us a rundown of what you anticipate that model run looking like? Can we fill in your modeling tool here so we have at least some form of framework of understanding what you're going to present to co-managers tomorrow?
Yeah. So I want to be upfront. I haven't had conversations with the management staff yet. We're going to get together and take the feedback that we heard today. There's nothing that we've fully settled on just yet. Hearing kind of the conversation today and what I was kind of what I was initially anticipating would be a path that made more sense. I do think that, and hearing some support from the Marine Area 11 folks, I do think a good starting place is adding in those buffered sublegal legal ratios. And then also adding in chum non-retention in November. Those parts are relatively low impact. And then from there, unless we hear something very different, I was going to look at quota increases in Marine Area 9, 10, and 5 in the summer to look at some of the reductions that we'd made last year near the end of the process and try to get those back more in line with what they would have been prior to that reduction. And the goal would be to try to get to 70 Stillaguamish mortalities in making those changes. I do think that's high in terms of what we'd have in terms of Stillaguamish mortalities. And once again, being upfront that the reason that we made those changes to some of those areas last year was for Snohomish. Snohomish is going to be a limiter in the coming year. So it might be very challenging to get some of those changes through. But for a starting point, I think that's kind of what made more sense. There really aren't too many areas in the modeling with the kind of the three stocks that we have as constrainers, Nooksack, Snohomish, and Stillaguamish. There aren't really too many areas in outside of kind of South and Mid Sound where an increase might be possible. That doesn't then affect one of those other stocks is kind of the issue that we're running into this year.
Okay, so with the considering what you mentioned there, what's the Area 7 package that would be included in that? Because you mentioned everything in there but Area 7. Would that just be going with the 6-day package that you listed?
That would be we'd probably just use what last year's quota was in Marine Area 7. That's a little bit higher than the 6-day
Right.
package. And the logic there would be that we're keeping it the same as last year's fishery.
Okay. How does 2022's Snohomish River impacts compare to what you're modeling to achieve this year? Because we have kind of similar numbers between this year and that model run that year. Actually, we have significantly more this year than we did in 2022. For Snohomish.
Abundance does play into it, but another big piece that could potentially play into it is the age composition. Depending on kind of the structure of the ages of the cohort, we could see different impacts on different ages in fisheries. So for example, if there's a fishery that has higher sublegal encounter rates, if you have a higher cohort of age 2s in terms of Snohomish, then you might expect that those comprise more of that sublegal catch than say there's a high cohort of age 4s in terms of Snohomish. And the age structure that we see, I think, is at least part of the what's playing into what we're seeing in terms of exploitation rate for that stock relative to 2022.
Okay, I might have you educate me better on that later. That'll be it for now. Thank you.
And we have a hand online from Zach. Zach, go ahead.
Hey, is there gonna be a presentation on the Area 10? There's an Area 1011 management proposal handout that was included in the file list. Is that gonna be something that y'all are gonna talk on this meeting, or should we just go right into feedback on that? Just don't want to jump the gun if there's gonna be some discussion of that.
He was asking about the Marine Area 1011 proposal and if that's something that we were going to have additional discussions at in this meeting or whether that would be better for a different time.
So once again, I'm going to look into the audience here at Ty Garber from our modeling team, who he and our mark selective fishery biologist, Sarah Richardson, helped do the analysis and put this proposal together. But essentially what it is, it's using our sampling and monitoring programs to inform an open date. So the intention would be that we would publish in the pamphlet, so just for example, an August 1st start date, no matter what. But through our sampling and monitoring programs, if we saw within our test fisheries a legal marked proportion of the catch, over a certain, several days, and trying to project that out, we would potentially open early, right? So part of that is just trying to align what the model predicts for a legal mark proportion to what we're seeing within the fishery to try to maximize the catch of legal size fish and that time on the water. So it's really just using that adaptability and the uncertainty that we see, from modeling results, and just trying to ground truth that through our monitoring programs in season and provide that longest spread of opportunity that we could. I think that would really just be for the summer fishery, right? So, I mean, it could be that we publish an August 1st start date, but we actually start somewhere in early or mid-July, depending on what we're seeing in our test fishery. Conversely, if we were seeing really high sublegal encounters throughout the month, we would go ahead and open August 1st anyways, and just go ahead and offer that opportunity in August for those returning adults maximizing that harvest in the time period whenever we expect those adults to be in their highest proportion in the marine area. Ty, did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I just wanted to sort of say that relative to that, I like that idea, right? I think it makes more sense to be, if we're concerned about sublegal encounters, the sublegal encounter rate is higher at the beginning than at the end. And so it's, we're trying to avoid the situation where we are closing at the end when the rate is lower rather than closing at the beginning when the rate is higher. And so I like that idea. I think my one piece of feedback would just be that I would love to see that maybe if depending on sort of what the feedback that people get is, maybe considering setting that opening date to, I think it is in July, the 25th. I know we've been opening that on a Thursday, just sort of as that's been our that seems to have been the tradition in the past few years, whether that's because of the alignment with Area 9 and 7 openers or otherwise. So the 25th of July is that last Thursday, and that would be 1 week before the 1 week before August 1st. And I think that might be a way to capture a lot of that same benefit, but also looking at that chart of basically how it would have happened in previous seasons. That's still, I think that might strike a better balance just as we try this out for the first year to see if it works. So I would put a plug in for considering having the listed date as the 25th instead of the 1st. But otherwise, I really like the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to echo his recommendation and do think that that's a good idea. I have some questions and I don't know how others feel, but I know I have people that come in from out of state to fish with me, and sometimes having a known date in there is good. Although if the opportunity to fish earlier is going to allow us more days on the water and the juveniles aren't there, I still think that's good.
Thanks, Rob.
And we have another hand online from Brett. Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys. Once again, in the weeds. I obviously agree with the later opening date as I stated before. I also agree with the idea that I think we need to have a hard date so that those of us that well, I want to make it possible for people that are not retired to be able to make it out for these fisheries and plan for it. It's already hard enough for those friends of mine that don't have a set date until sometime in April to make plans for their summer fisheries. So I think we need to have a little consideration for the folks that are still working and can't just on a whim go out and go fishing. I also have a couple comments on coho fisheries. One is if we have a little room in 8-1, and I think we do this year to allow a little flexibility, to have the fishery last a little longer than it did last year. Oftentimes, the first couple weeks of October are very good for coho fishing in Area 8-1. And so if we can keep it open in Area 8-1 a little bit longer, given the increased abundance in the Skagit, I would appreciate that. The locals would appreciate that. The other fishery that's really important to the locals around here is the Stillaguamish coho fishery. Right now, based on what we're seeing, it looks like we might have a little bit more room to work, maybe on the Stilly as far as Chinook impacts go. And if we can set aside just a bit more room for that coho fishery in river, I know the locals around here would really appreciate that. That's something that is really valuable to the folks around here. Thank you.
I also wanted to say that I'd be supportive of the July 25th tentative start date on on Ty's proposal. Talked with quite a few constituents down there in the South Sound, and there was a lot of heartburn about the August 1st date. The optics are that a whole month of fishing is being lost. So I know that's probably not going to be the case, but I think it'd go over a little better if we had some date in July there towards the end of, somewhere in the end of July. I also spoke with Mark when I first walked in and, asked him and the public relations team to, I'm putting a Medium article together or something to thoroughly explain this to the public. He said he's on it and they're working on that because I think there's going to be an education component to this to make sure that these constituents in these areas don't feel like they're getting screwed out of 3 or 4 weeks opportunity.
And thanks, Gabe. Maybe this is a good time for me to mention, this is really just one proposal the department had. I think we're also considering other things, different management objectives other than maybe like, sublegal or unmarked encounters. If there's other things that we can manage to, potentially like mortalities. So I think these are all things that we're considering and having, preliminary discussions with co-managers. So I don't want to necessarily have folks on the path to think that this is exactly where we're going to go for this year. I think we just wanted to throw it on the table as one of many things that we consider as a change for management to address making sure that we're fishing in August when those fish are there. Lots of ways we can go about reaching that goal. And I think we were just putting one out for consideration.
And if I could, maybe just to add to that a little bit, as we're exploring modeling scenarios where we're buffering that sublegal legal ratio, if we couple that with the proposal that Ty and Sarah developed, then we would reach that sublegal legal ratio theoretically quicker. So there's kind of an interactive effect there between those two pieces.
This is Norm Reinhardt again. I'm just going to put my oar in the water here. When I mentioned this to fishermen, their response was they're taking away, because we fish also North Area 11, they're taking away 15 days in Area 10 and a whole month in Area 11 with this 1 August proposal. But what I'm understanding this proposal's doing is locking in a 1 August date with the potential of opening earlier as the numbers. So my perception is that the department would rather announce an in-season emergency opener rather than an in-season emergency closure with all the choppiness we had last year. Am I getting that message correct?
That's exactly right. We've heard from the angling community and advisors for, any number of years, that the less we can disrupt fisheries through in-season management actions, that's the preferred path. So I think we're trying to think of different ways that we can start a fishery or publish a fishery open date and, basically have it run into a season where once we meet our Chinook objectives, then we can just transition into coho and keep the fishery open, through the fall coho season.
We have a hand online from Travis. Travis, go ahead. Oh, and you can unmute now. Travis, you can unmute.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Just a quick question on the co-manager meetings. Because we're not privy to what goes on there, and a lot of us are new to this north of Falcon. I understand you guys come up with a proposal, take it to the co-managers. Can you kind of give an overview or tell us what happens during these co-manager meetings? Is it kind of a give and take negotiation where you guys propose something and by the time it's done and negotiated with, it's totally different from what you guys propose? Can you just maybe enlighten us on how those negotiations are made?
I'll take a stab, and if any of my coworkers want to jump in, please feel free. So I really want to just say that, you know, the whole co-manager relationship doesn't just happen during North of Falcon. It's a year-round thing. We work really closely with the tribal biologists and fishery managers, looking at information throughout the year, from returns to out-migrating juveniles and all sorts of information in between. So once we get into the preseason, you know, our co-manager meetings around the preseason really start in January, where we come together and, you know, identify key issues that we expect to be in front of us as we go through the preseason. We try to work on plans for addressing those as we go through the preseason. We're in this spot right now where we've set ocean options last week, and we've had those initial discussions primarily with coastal co-managers. And you know, obviously we're exchanging different thoughts on those fishing levels in the ocean and what that means for both the outside coastal fisheries and the inside fisheries. From there, we go to the co-manager meeting that's happening tomorrow, where basically it's where the state and the tribes put their initial fishery proposals for this year into a singular co-manager model, and we look at the results. Most often what happens from that is we'll identify, you know, those stocks where we're not meeting the objectives, and then we'll go and break out into regional meetings around those watersheds where we're meeting with the regional co-managers and, you know, talking through the fisheries proposals that are on the table, talking about changes that we may make in the next round of modeling, and then, you know, just seeing where that gets us as part of what we're trying to do to meet those management objectives. It's really an iterative process where we'll, you know, we'll take that feedback and we'll each go back and develop new modeling inputs. And then, you know, we'll pull all those together and run another model and look at those results as co-managers and see how far we get. A number of the co-managers only fish in the terminal areas. So, you know, really they're waiting for a lot of those pre-terminal fisheries to get settled out before we can have the best understanding of what the final package might be in the river. But we're still having those discussions through the process, you know, both considering inside and outside fisheries changes to meet those modeling objectives. Does that help to answer your question, Travis?
Yes.
How's everybody doing? More questions or comments in the room? Kurt, go ahead.
Kurt, you can unmute.
Okay, thank you. This is Kurt Kramer again. I had two things. I was hoping Kristen could be here and best with whatever her issues are. You know, both in summer and winter, we have this real issue of sublegals, and it's been difficult to get a handle on that. But I wonder if there was some way that we could figure out a way to give those anglers that were voluntarily willing to say in, you know, Area 9 during the summer to fish with 5-inch plugs, get credit for the impact, the smaller impacts they would have on the sublegal Chinooks. If, for example, the on-water boat surveys sampled, you know, 20% of the boats opted to choose in those kinds of methods to limit their sublegal impacts, could we figure out some way that, you know, we get credit for that in season impacts? I'm sure this is something that can't be done this year, but I think it's something akin to that is worth considering. And then I had a coho question with Snohomish coho going to be the limiting coho fishery this year. My question is what the summer fishery in Marine Area 10, June and July, my understanding is a mixed stock fishery, and in that fishery there has to be a lot of Snohomish coho. You know, is this year just going to be a repeat of last year, only instead of Snohomish or Skagit coho, we're going to be stocking Snohomish coho? And it would be nice for our discussions next time to have some insights into, the stock contributions of those fisheries and what some of the trade-offs would be in terms of being able to harvest a fish in 9 or 8.2 versus a fish, during September versus a fish in, say, June in area 10. Something to think about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. I think Ty and I have looked at this in the past few days as we've been thinking about fisheries. Obviously the only fisheries that are in the model right now are last year's fisheries. If we're looking at that relative to this year's abundances, it does appear that the tribal fisheries in the marine area and, close to the hatchery, as well as the in-river sport fisheries currently have the highest impact on Snohomish. So I think that's, as we're thinking about fisheries and how things are affected, that's where we would be looking for kind of the initial moves to be made, to see where we need to get to be within that management objective.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you again. If this year's most concerning stock is going to be presumed the Snohomish, according to you, Derek, then does that provide us some more flexibility for bolstering quota for marine areas 7? The 3 options you have is a 6, a 9, and a 15. We don't see a 12. I'm not sure why we would go from 9 to 15, but in lieu of that, also, when we model a 6-day, we actually are gaining a fish and a half, where I would encourage you, and I know you said already that you are not going to present a winter opportunity in tomorrow's run, at least. But if we're looking at a scenario where we are specifically more concerned about the Snohomish stock than we are the Still-Guamish stock, this sounds like a perfect opportunity and a perfect year going back to actually address and look at that winter opportunity, whether it is 8.1, 8.2, or it is area 7. But if there was a year since those fishing opportunities have been removed, there was a year that maybe there's an allowable impact or allowable sliver of fish available, this would be the year. And plus, when we left last year's NOF, felt like we were as close as we had been, and we were left feeling optimistic that this year it would be taken more seriously. So it is a bit of a concern that that's not being discussed here in the early stages as more of a viable option for us, especially considering the circumstances we're dealing with this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. We have been looking at the winter fisheries in relation to our 3 main stocks here. I put this back up on screen here. When I was looking at Marine Area 7 in the winter, and if you'll remember, kind of in the scenario tool, that was one of the proposals that I'd looked at where I didn't look so much at 6 and 9. The reason why I looked at 7, and it's kind of surprising since it's the marine area right out front of Nooksack, but historically it looks like there's actually a lower impact in Marine Area 7 in the winter time period in terms of the modeling. But the problem with Marine Area 7, as you probably see, is Snohomish over there in time step 4. It's the most expensive fishery on that stock. You mentioned kind of with a little bit more room on Still-Guamish potentially, and with Snohomish being maybe our primary constrainer this year, that there might be some room to kind of craft things a little bit differently. I was thinking down that same line of logic, looking at where kind of we could see potential changes. What I saw was that Still-Guamish and Snohomish have a pretty similar distribution in terms of where they're caught. There are some differences there. But what I was seeing is that both of those stocks are most impacted in the winter fisheries, and for Snohomish, it's also true.
So when we look at this figure, when we see the numbers 2, 3, and 4, is that for per thousand? Is that in thousands?
Yep, that's in thousands.
Okay, so when we are looking at, let's just say Area 7 in Snohomish, if we're at 2,000 fish, we're at 0 AEQs. If we're at 2,000 fish, we're at 0 AEQs on Stillies. If we're at 2,000 fish, we're at 0 AEQs on Nooksack. 2,000 fish seems to be, and I'll stop and let you know, am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, I should say, since this is based on the fisheries from 2019, if there wasn't a fishery occurring in that time period, then there's a quota of 0. And it is a good catch, because I should have mentioned that in the beginning. When you're looking at time step 2, there was no fishery there, so that's why there's 0 impacts. It's not, if we did add impacts in, if we did add a fishery in there, then we could look at that. Time step 2 in many areas hasn't been open in a really long time, other than 11. And
Okay, so I'm not understanding the chart correctly then. With the time step 2, time step 3, help an idiot out here. What exactly does that mean?
yeah, so the time step 2 and time step 3, if you see 0 impacts there, then that's most likely, there's 2 reasons what cause that. Either there's no stock impacts, which is kind of what you were potentially getting at, but more probably it's because there's no fishery modeled. So an example of that first case, if you look at Nooksack in Area 10 sport in time step 3, that means that there's essentially, from the coded wire tags, we don't really recover Nooksack fish in time step 3 in that fishery, because there was an Area 10 sport fishery in 2019 in time step 3. Time step 3 being July to September. But if you were to look at, for example, the time step 2s here for 12 or 13 or 5 or 6 or whatever, we just didn't have a fishery there, and that's why there's 0 impacts.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Zach, you can unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly here, I'd love to see the sub-legal to legal buffer potentially modeled or considered also for that Area 10 season, as well as we saw for Area 11 in that earlier time frame. I know that the sub-legal encounter rate is a little bit of a funky issue in terms of how it's modeled or not modeled, but I'd love to see that considered as well, as a potential different, just another option to consider, and more as we're weighing this like delayed start with potentially early open. Just I know that was seemingly not too tough on the model for Area 11, and so I'd love to see that considered also for either Area 10 or or Area 11 in the time step 3. And then secondly, sort of, do you have a sense of, or have you looked at under this management regime with the test fishing and the live tracked sublegal encounter rate, when the season would have opened in previous years? Like if we had done this basically like on what date in 2023, 2022, 2021 would these seasons have opened? And I'm not sure if you have that, but I'd love to hear thoughts on those two things.
Thanks, Zach. We can take a look at Area 10. We can take a look at buffering that sublegal legal ratio as well as we huddle up after this meeting. I think that we have looked at when those seasons might open. I'm going to see if Ty would be willing to take this one.
Yeah, so it's very dependent on the sublegal's abundance in the area. Let's say more often than not that it opens earlier, right? So I have a whole write-up online about this that I could share with anybody who wants to see it. I guess I could. We'll put a link on the website for the write-up on this. It has all the dates, the openers and closures, and different management under different management criteria for previous fisheries.
Awesome. Thank you. That'd be great.
Yeah, the handout that we provided today online, as well as in the room here, was just a very basic outline of the analysis that Ty and Sarah did. And so we'll get that link to our public affairs folks and get it up online so people can see all the data and analysis that went in behind that proposal.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments in the room or online?
I just want to make sure I understand what you mean by time step. Time step is a period of months, like time steps one's January, February, March. 2 is April, May, June. Is that what we mean?
Yeah, so thanks, Norm. I get, I do this all day, every day, and I gotta make sure I'm checking my lingo that I'm using here when I'm speaking to the public versus technical staff and others. Time step 2, when we refer to that, is May to June for Chinook. Time step 3 is July through September, and then time step 4 is October through April.
And I might just mention, so, we don't leave out coho. A little bit different for coho. We have a January through June, and then each month, so January to June is time step 1, July is time step 2, August 3, September 4, and then it goes October to December for coho. A little bit different, but still, we still, the way the model portions that stuff out is in time steps as well for coho. Other questions or comments?
We have a hand online from Travis. Travis, go ahead.
Oh, it's just me again. Can you explain how each marine area's quotas are determined? Like we've got a bunch of modeling there, but how, like specifically Marine Area 11? I believe last year we were given roughly 3,200 fish for our catch quota. What are those numbers based off of? Is it based off just solely hatchery surplus? Maybe kind of go over that, how those numbers are come up with.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. That's a great question. So we have a variety of methods that we employ for each marine area. We test the methods against each other to see which ones are performing better in terms of when you use one prediction method, what's the mean error with it versus a different prediction method, for example. And so the 3 primary methods we use, there's 2 that are simplistic and there's one that's a little bit more complex. The most simplistic one that we use is what's called a catch per day method, which looks at the number of days that we're open and the catch that it costs for each of those days open. And so when you're looking at the modeling tool in here, you might see that each kind of estimate of quota, or most of them at least, have a method that's associated with them. So this CPD method, that stands for that catch per day method. So this is using a recent 3-year average on what that catch per day open would be, and then applying that to a 15-day opening. Very simplistic. There is another one that we use that's kind of similar. It's looking at the run size that returns to Puget Sound and looking at a regression between that run size and the catch per day. So when we have higher returns, often in some areas we can see a higher catch per day because if there's more fish around, you're more likely to catch them. And so that's a method that we use. There's another method that we use. It's called an effort scaler, and folks might be familiar with this one. We've used it for many of our areas in the past. That effort scaler, basically looks at what the impact of a fishery might be on each stock in the modeling. So it's specific to an area and time period. And based on the abundances of the stocks that are caught in that fishery, you put in an effort to a recent year effort to estimate what the impact on each of those stocks would be. And then you sum together all the stock specific impacts to come up with a quota. So those are kind of our 3 primary methods when we're looking at kind of what a certain quota might translate to in terms of season. I will be upfront that in many of these areas in recent years, we've had a starting point that was either last year's fishery in terms of that effort scaler or in terms of that quota. Sometimes when we try to switch to a full season using some of these methods, it produces impacts that are just above where we need to be on Stillaguamish or one of our other stocks in a starting run. So hopefully that helps, Travis. Maybe if as you kind of peruse through the modeling tool here, if you have more questions about a specific method, just feel free to email me and I can get you some more information on that.
Okay, and then this is just for marine areas, correct? Do you guys do any modeling forecasts for freshwater in-season fisheries for sportsmen? Because I noticed there's no quota like specifically on the Puyallup River.
It varies fishery to fishery. So a lot of times the freshwater inputs are developed by our regional biologists, and there can be a variety of methodologies that they use. Occasionally, they'll come to help. They'll come to ask for some help or review from the modeling team. So occasionally we have some part in that, but for the most part, that's up to the regional biologists to come up with those quotas.
Okay, thanks.
And I might just add to that a little bit. You know, in recent years, the department's invested quite a bit of money, you know, with help from the legislature in expanding our freshwater fishery monitoring programs. And although we don't do, you know, specific in-season management for a number of these fisheries, there are fisheries that we do use that additional monitoring information to help ensure we're staying within those management objectives in specific watersheds. Skagit's one that I can think of where we've actually been able to expand opportunity, and the Snohomish, I guess. We've been able to expand opportunity in recent years just based on that in-season information that we get. So we think that's going to be pretty important moving forward. And that's why the department, with the help of the legislature, is going to continue to invest in some of those freshwater monitoring programs.
Yeah, I think that probably the freshwater monitoring would probably be more beneficial than the saltwater, I would imagine. I would imagine these river sport fishermen probably take quite a few more fish than the marine fishers do. Would you not agree?
I think it depends on the fishery and the watershed. And you know, it's a big mix across you know, lots of different marine areas, and you know, the freshwater is kind of the last in line. So again, you know, we really the whole goal here is to try to achieve fishing opportunity for all sectors, marine and freshwater, as to the best of our ability, given the limitations in what we're trying to do.
Moreover,
thank you.
When it comes to monitoring and specifically for Chinook, there are requirements once again in some of our marine areas that have impacts on Stillaguamish, laid out by the RMP on our sampling requirements.
Thank you, Derek. When we look at Area 7, the models between the 9-day opener and 15-day opener, and again, for you to teach me some more about this, but from a quota of 2,847 fish on a 9-day opener to a quota of 4,746 on a 15-day opener, that's a 41% increase from the 9-day to the 15. Yet the mortalities increased by nearly 75%. So how does that correlate when you have a quota increase of 41%, but a mortality increase of 74%, 74.1%?
I'd have to look at it to see. I can do a little bit of QAQC on the tool. I'm not 100% sure without looking at it as to the answer on that one.
Okay. I mean, just off of face value, am I missing something here? If I'm just taking the quota for a 9-day opener, comparing it to a quota for a 15-day opener, finding the percentage change, and then comparing it to the percentage change in mortalities that you have listed. I mean, that's cut and dry, isn't it?
Yeah, I would think it's not exactly linear because there's different ways that the model interacts with abundance. But it should be pretty close. So I'm actually surprised that you see that in there. I'd want to double check it and run the numbers on my side. It isn't impossible that I might have made an error in it.
We're always okay to admit when we're wrong.
We have another hand online, Mark, from E. E, you can go ahead.
Hello, yeah, this is E. I would simply, in the vein of considering opportunities for WDFW to increase opportunity to go fishing for fishermen. I note in the past few years that we've had a pretty healthy resident coho population in Puget Sound, particularly in areas 9, 10, and 11. I would note that fishing from shore has very little impact on Chinook salmon specifically, and it might allow anglers to access some of the abundant resident coho that are around throughout June, July, and August. So I guess I would encourage WDFW to consider some opportunities that were maybe, if impacts on Chinook are constraining fisheries, why can't we shift some of our seasons toward closing fishing from boats for Chinook and or coho, but leaving some of the shorebound opportunities open, or starting seasons earlier in the year for shore fishing only because those resident coho are around. So that's just an opportunity to increase that I bring forward to you at WDFW. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
It's not a terrible idea. I think one of the challenges that we have, especially if we were to offer, shore fishing and not offer boat fishing at the same time, it becomes problematic from an enforcement perspective. Can a guy pull up to the shore, hop out of his boat, land a fish, get back into the boat, and go back to the marina and land that fish? Would that be legal? I think those are some of the things that we struggle with as we're thinking about crafting those opportunities. And, that's one of our obligations as well in all this, is to provide seasons that are enforceable through our enforcement program. So like I said, it's not a bad idea, but it would be something that we'd have to think about the trade-offs of crafting an opportunity like that and what it might mean overall versus our ability to enforce that as an agency. So I don't necessarily want to cut off discussion here, but I guess I'm gonna throw the meeting schedule back up on the board and just let folks see where we're going to be here in the next couple weeks as we start to round out proposals. Got another hand here.
I just wanted to thank you for improving the audio system greatly this week. It is much appreciated.
Well, I'll a big shout out to Jeff from our IT department, who definitely helped make this a more pleasant meeting here at the office building too, compared to our first initial meeting. The sound quality is greatly improved. So thanks for that, Rob. Again, for folks interested in Columbia River, that's upcoming next week. We've got a couple of Puget Sound recreational discussions in the evening next week on Tuesday and Thursday. We'll be in Linwood here towards the end of the month on the 27th on Wednesday. And then not the following week, or I guess Friday of the following week or Saturday of the following week in early April, we'll be at the Westin in Seattle. Don't want to forget our friends Willapa Grays Harbor there on the 28th for folks who are interested in those coastal fisheries on the South Coast. And then, I mentioned next Tuesday's meeting will be primarily focused on Puget Sound Rec and some of those North Coast freshwater fisheries. So any other last minute comments or questions? One more here in the room. And one more online.
Derek, Alex again. I just want to clarify for the record here that I was off on my numbers there. It's actually a 66% increase in quota from a 9-day opening to a 15-day opening. But to go from 3.51 mortalities to 13.51 mortalities is a 284% increase. So let's talk about that afterwards. That'd be great. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Alex.
And we have E's hand back up. Go ahead.
Hello, yeah, one more comment about coho fishing. Is there any chance we'll ever get coho fishing back in October in Marine Area 9? Pretty much the time when some of our strong wild runs of coho come back, we have to leave the water. So I'm curious about the options for October in Area 9. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. We had a meeting with our Puget Sound advisors yesterday. There were a number of suggestions for some additional non-selective coho opportunity. I think folks who have been paying attention know that in recent years, we really had scaled back that non-selective opportunity in Puget Sound as we've been trying to work on rebuilding Snohomish and some other stocks that have been problematic in recent years. So given where the abundances are this year, you know, Skagit being a big one as far as a higher abundance tier this year, it's definitely something that we can consider and look at for additional non-selective time. And I think there's one more online.
And we have one more hand from Carl. Carl, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to comment quickly on the strategy for you know, opening Chinook a little bit later based on some you know, some quick numbers collected by sampling by test fishing. So you know, this strategy that you've talked about a little bit, I think it's a great idea. I would like to talk a little bit about, you know, after this meeting, between now and the end of this process, about getting some assurance from your co-managers that, you know, that you're going to get support to be able to make an emergency opening based on these numbers, and you know what the numbers need to be. And I'm getting some pushback from some of the membership that, you know, that we've never seen an emergency opening. I know that that's not true because I get they're mostly in the rivers. You do it all the time in the freshwater to have emergency openings. However, it is very unusual in marine waters. And so we do want to have a little bit of assurance that, you know, you're going to have support from the co-management to have that sort of strategy, and whatever the parameters are, that they're going to be supportive of those parameters to have an emergency opening. For instance, in say Marine Area 10 in, you know, July, if you put August 1 in the regs for the Chinook opener, but you have strong support that the adults showed up and you could open Chinook July 18th, we would just like to see that there's some assurance that that's really able to happen, because there is some skepticism about that strategy.
So for folks who may not be familiar, at the end of this process, the co-managers come up with the list of agreed fisheries. Essentially, it's a document that's prepared that lists all these the state and tribal fisheries that are planned for the year. Sometimes there's management plans or harvest levels associated with that. Carl, I imagine that if we were to move forward with this and gain agreement from the co-managers, all those stipulations about how and when we may open would be part of that list of agreed fisheries document and agreed to by the co-managers. And with that, I'm going to allow Mr. Kroonquist online to be our last question for today.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Mark. When in talking about Area 9 and really Area 6, 5, and 6 for non-selective coho fishing, I'd be interested in seeing some numbers. I understand that some of the tribes are releasing large numbers of unclipped coho that are going to have to come back through 5, 6, 9 to get into the inner sound. If those numbers can be factored, looking over the last couple of years, factor those numbers into return rates. We'd sure like to see in 6 and 5 both a nice non-selective coho fishery. September 1 would be nice to parallel 7. We could go with September 15 to mid-October. And even one one unclipped fish in the daily bag limit would sure get people off the water. We're not wading through a half dozen to a dozen or more unclipped fish to find a hatchery fish. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. And you know, we took some notes yesterday at the advisor meeting and we've got that today. So as we move into our discussions internally this afternoon, we'll certainly consider that as part of the initial proposal. And with that, I really want to take another opportunity to thank everybody for being here today, both online and in person. This part of the process is really important to us to make sure that we're conveying the best available information that we have and taking feedback on seasons and season structure and trying to do the best we can to maximize these opportunities for everybody. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.